Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this What If story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by KatNeedsSleep on Wattpad. Now let's start. Izuku Midoriya was a dead man. However, Kage was very much alive and currently bouncing around Mustafu, Japan, heading toward the nearby police station. His motivation? Simply to annoy a certain detective. A smile spread across the vigilante's face as he continued leaping across rooftops. The streets had been surprisingly quiet that night, which meant less work for him, but it also made Kage uneasy. It was almost never quiet at night, and that was precisely why patrolling was so much more thrilling. There were more villains and criminals lurking about, and it didn't help that the heroes rarely ventured out after dark. Most of them were in it for the fame and fortune, disappearing the moment the cameras stopped rolling and the lights dimmed. Enter Kage, one of Japan's most notorious vigilantes. He had begun roaming the streets of Mustafu roughly 3 years ago, and since then, he had thwarted countless criminals and villains from their nefarious plans. The best part? No one knew his true identity. Almost no one had seen his face, and those who had could only describe a flash of black and bright green eyes. Green eyes were not particularly rare, so the Mustafu police had struggled to make any progress on the Kage case. Yet, they were frequently interrupted by loud explosions outside the station. The first time this occurred, Tsukachi had panicked, rushing outside with his weapon drawn to locate the source of the disturbance. Instead of finding a culprit, he discovered a small note resting on the police station steps. The note wasn't what made Tsukachi groan. It was the millions of tiny glitter pieces scattered across the street. The note read, "Hey Mr. Detective Man, since you seem to have a lot on your hands at the moment, I have taken the liberty of rounding up some local criminals. You will find them unconscious at the addresses listed below. Yours, K." Since that day, similar notes had appeared at the police station almost every night, accompanied by some sort of explosion. Consequently, the Mustafu Police Department had become quite adept at cleaning up glitter. A muffled cry interrupted Kage's thoughts. He halted at the edge of a roof, gazing down into the alley below. A girl lay on the ground, covered in dirt and bruises, crying as a man approached her slowly. Kage landed silently behind the man, catching the end of his taunt. "Quirkless trash." The man raised his hand to strike the girl, but Kage had seen enough. He leaped forward, seizing the larger man's arm and twisting his wrist. The man shouted and turned to escape Kage's grip. Suddenly, Kage felt a sharp pain in his hand and glanced down to see what appeared to be a knife protruding from the man's arm. It had grazed the top of Kage's hand, not too deep but enough to make him loosen his hold. The man pulled away quickly and lunged at Kage again, more blades emerging from his skin. Kage jumped back, reaching behind him for something. There it was. He grasped one of his 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃 sticks, drawing it from its sheath. Dodging another attack, Kage rushed forward, driving the stick into the man's abdomen. He pressed a button on the side, and electricity surged through the stick, shocking the man. He stumbled backward but somehow remained standing. That should have knocked him out. The man yelled and charged again, this time retracting his small blades to form a long sword from his palm. Kage narrowly avoided being skewered, but he felt a sharp pain in his side. The massive blade had not missed him entirely. "I need to end this quickly before I lose too much blood. I need to help that girl." Kage stepped forward and drew his other 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃 stick from his back. As the man charged once more, Kage stood ready, waiting for the perfect moment. Just before the man would have run him through, Kage jumped onto the man's back, delivering a kick that sent him crashing to the ground. The man groaned, struggling to rise, but Kage pressed both 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃 sticks into his back and activated them. The man jerked once before falling still. Kage stepped off him, checking for a pulse to ensure he was still alive before turning back to the girl. She was huddled in the corner of the alley, tears streaming down her dirty face. Cautiously, Kage approached, kneeling to meet her gaze. She couldn't have been older than 10, and the bruises covering her body ignited a fierce anger within him. He needed to find her parents. "Kage, step away from the girl." Kage sighed, straightening up and turning toward the voice. Parents would have been ideal, but a hero would suffice. He smiled beneath his mask and took a few steps toward the newcomer at the alley's entrance. The hero's face was obscured by shadows, but his hair floated above his head, and his dark red eyes pierced through the night. Even in the darkness, Kage recognized him. Black hair, black attire, a capture scarf, and an eternally weary expression. Well, hello there, Eraserhead. How are you on this fine evening? Eraserhead simply regarded the shorter man with his glowing red eyes. He reiterated his command, "You heard me, Kage." Kage's smile broadened, and he took another step forward. Suddenly, the wound in his side flared with pain. He gritted his teeth, unwilling to reveal his injury, unwilling to show weakness. Because that was what he was, wasn't it? That was why he could never be a true hero. He was too. Reaching behind him, Kage secured his 𝐒𝐮𝐬 sticks back into their sheath and pulled out a grappling hook instead. He noticed Eraser's capture scarf shoot out, but Kage was already soaring through the air, landing on the roof of the building and rolling to his feet. He smiled down at Eraser, who had chosen not to follow him and instead check on the girl. Kage called out to Eraser, asking him to ensure the girl made it back to her family, expressing his gratitude before turning away and running. He leaped over alleys and sprinted across rooftops, feeling his energy waning as the effects of BLD loss began to take hold. His vision started to blur, and he realized he might not make it home in time. He thought of his mother, regretting that he might see her sooner than he had planned. There was only one other place Kage could go, and he hoped he could reach it before it was too late. He pivoted and dashed to the left, heading toward the only other safe haven he knew in Mustafu. Kage flinched as he met the gaze of his pink-haired friend, 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐿. Though she was only 5 feet 2 inches, she seemed to tower over him, her usual bright expression replaced by a scowl. Kage had met Mei by chance during one of his first patrols when he heard a loud bang and saw smoke billowing from an apartment window. Investigating, he found Mei with her pink hair slightly singed, a wild smile on her face. That encounter marked the beginning of a significant friendship in his life. Mei had taken Kage under her wing, treating him like a little brother despite their similar ages. They often spent time together when she wasn't in school. When Kage approached her for better gear, she eagerly agreed to help. She was also the only person who knew his real name and was allowed to see his face. Mei demanded to know what Kage had been thinking when he got hurt. He leaned back on her bed, having just finished stitching up his side, grateful that she waited until he was done before expressing her frustration. Kage replied that he just wanted to save someone like himself, glaring back at her. Mei sighed and plopped into a chair, facing her cluttered work desk. Kage knew she aspired to attend UA, and he would be surprised if she didn't succeed. She was brilliant and already excelled at creating support gear. All of Kage's equipment, from his electric 𝐒𝐮𝐬 sticks to his butterfly knives and attachable boot spikes, was crafted by her. She had even designed everything to match his Vigilante outfit: a dark green hoodie, black cargo briefs, a black mask, and his signature red high tops. As Mei tinkered with his mask, Kage approached to see what she was working on. Her desk was a chaotic mix of ideas and blueprints. She was adjusting the voice modifier she had added to his mask. Kage carefully organized his medical supplies in one of Mei's drawers, wanting to keep his things neat despite her messiness. Mei casually mentioned that her parents would be away for about 3 weeks, joking that if he planned to come through her window bleeding, he should do it then. Kage blinked at her before letting out a small laugh. Mei's parents were rarely home, often going on week-long business trips, which left her plenty of time to tinker and experiment. Kage thanked her for the heads-up, assuring her that he would let her know if he felt like bleeding out on her floor anytime soon. Mei muttered something about silly broccoli boys before returning to her work. Kage was fairly certain she wasn't referring to him. He stood up to put his shoes back on, and Mei tossed his mask to him, prompting him to think quickly. The mask hit his chest and fell into his lap, leading to shared laughter between them. Kage picked up the mask, adjusted it to fit with his goggles, and smiled at Mei before hopping out of her window. The wind rushed past him as he fell, and he deployed his grappling hook, shooting upward just before hitting the ground. He waved to Mei as he shot past her window, and she responded with a playful gesture before closing her window and returning to her desk. She was truly a great friend. Though he felt exhausted, Kage knew he couldn't ask Mei for anything more that night. He made his way back to his own apartment, each leap to the next building causing his side to sting. The pain was familiar, reminding him of countless nights spent patrolling Mustafu and confronting villains. Kage often wondered what his life would have been like if he hadn't chosen to become a vigilante. He might have lost hope entirely. The thought of taking a swan dive off a roof flashed through his mind, and he cringed at the memory. He disliked recalling that painful time, but sometimes memories would intrude, burrowing under his skin and making him wish he could erase them. The plot thickened as Tsukachi choked on his coffee. He glanced up at Aizawa, whose expression was entirely serious. Tsukachi returned his gaze to the case file he had been reviewing before the hobo hero's interruption. It was Kage's file. There was little information within, just a few testimonies from individuals the vigilante had rescued. None could provide a description of Kage beyond his eyes. Tsukachi focused back on Aizawa, who was now seated across from him. Aizawa appeared even more exhausted than usual, a feat in itself. It was clear he had not rested the previous night. Tsukachi leaned forward in his chair, pushing Kage's file aside, eager for answers. Aizawa sighed, explaining that he had heard fighting but arrived too late to witness it. He described seeing a figure in a dark green hoodie and black breeds kneeling beside a girl. Aizawa had attempted to apprehend him peacefully, but the figure had escaped, eluding even his capture scarf. Tsukachi inquired about any distinctive features of the figure's face, but Aizawa shook his head, stating that the individual wore a black mask and green goggles, with his hood obscuring his hair. He noted that the figure was somewhat short and likely used a voice modifier. Their conversation was interrupted by a quiet buzzing. Aizawa retrieved his phone, checking the caller ID before frowning. It was Nizu, and Aizawa felt compelled to answer, sensing the importance of the call. Tsukachi gestured toward the door, indicating that Aizawa should take the call, reminding him to inform him if he encountered Kage again. Aizawa stood and exited, leaving Tsukachi to jot down notes on the observations Aizawa had shared. He sighed, leaning back in his chair, reflecting on the fact that in 3 years he had never seen the vigilante, but now they had a credible sighting from a pro-hero. Perhaps Kage was becoming less elusive. Aizawa had left the police station and was walking toward a cafe he frequented when Nizu's voice came through the phone, reminding him about the upcoming UA entrance exam. Aizawa sighed, acknowledging the reminder but questioning if that was the sole reason for the call. Nizu, however, revealed that he had heard about Aizawa's encounter with the local vigilante and expressed a longing to speak with him. Aizawa paused, surprised. Nizu wanted him to track down Japan's most wanted vigilante, someone who had only been seen once, for a chat. Aizawa found Nizu's cheerful tone unsettling. He reluctantly agreed to try, though he could not guarantee success. After hanging up, he scowled, pondering how he could possibly contact Kage without any leads. He knew he needed caffeine to think clearly. As he entered the cafe, a young boy with curly green hair approached him. The boy had dark green eyes and a warm, albeit slightly off, smile. Aizawa recognized him from previous visits. He always gave off a happy yet nervous vibe, remaining somewhat closed off. Time passed, and Izuku was asked by his manager, Yui, to close up the cafe that night. He smiled at her, unable to refuse her pleading gaze. After she left, he locked up the cafe and turned off the lights before heading upstairs to his small apartment. It was modest, consisting of just a bedroom and a bathroom, but it was sufficient for him. He felt immense gratitude toward Yui, who had offered him a place to stay without asking questions about his past. As he approached his closet, he retrieved his vigilante gear, slipping it on with a yawn. He desperately needed rest, but tonight was not the night for it. He had work to do. This chapter serves to introduce the cafe and Yui, who may play significant roles in the future. Yui is an original character, created because the author couldn't find existing characters suitable for the cafe owner role. She is around 30 years old, married, and has a 10-year-old son named Kei, who might appear later, although Yui's husband likely won't. Mei was in a state of chaos, and Izuku was puzzled by her frantic energy. She expressed her excitement about the upcoming UA entrance exam, which was only 5 days away. Mei was determined to create impressive gadgets to showcase to the examiners. Izuku, feeling overwhelmed, flopped back onto her bed, knowing he had witnessed this version of Mei before and regretted being there. He couldn't leave her in this state, fearing she might cause a disaster. Mei insisted that Izuku help her, bouncing over and playfully hitting him with a pillow. Startled, Izuku lost his balance and fell to the floor, where he lay with his arms spread out, listening to Mei's laughter. She quickly shifted the conversation, eager to hear about a hero Izuku had encountered recently. Izuku, sitting up, reminded her that she needed his help with her gadgets. Mei, however, was more interested in the story, claiming that sharing it would be helpful to her. Izuku, acknowledging his lack of skills in building, decided it would be easier to recount his experience. It began to describe how he had been busy saving a girl when he encountered 𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐻𝐸, a pro-hero known for his quirk that erased others' abilities. Izuku recalled how 𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐻𝐸's hair had been floating and his eyes glowing, indicating he was trying to erase Izuku's quirk. He had left the girl with 𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐻𝐸, believing she would be safe. Mei commented on how clumsy Izuku seemed, noting that it was the first time he had been seen by anyone, especially a pro-hero. Izuku felt a mix of confusion and annoyance at her remark, defending himself by stating he was younger than her. As Mei returned to her work, Izuku's thoughts drifted. Perhaps he had become too comfortable and careless, and he resolved to be more cautious in the future. Unfortunately, his resolve was tested when Kage, on his usual night patrol, nearly collided with 𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐻𝐸. Now, he found himself being pursued across the rooftops of Mustafu, trying to evade the hero. Kage was startled when 𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐻𝐸 called out, wanting to talk. Hesitant but curious, Kage paused to listen. 𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐻𝐸 informed Kage that 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐃𝐞𝐭, the principal of UA, wanted to meet him on the day of the entrance exam. Kage's mind raced at the thought of 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦 wanting to speak with him. After a moment of contemplation, he agreed to think about it. He forced a smile beneath his mask, saluted mockingly, and dashed away across the rooftops, returning to his apartment, his mind buzzing with possibilities. Once inside, Kage removed his gear and decided to sleep on the matter, planning to formulate a strategy in the morning. As the entrance exam approached, Izuku felt the weight of expectations. The imposing front gate of UA loomed over him as he walked through, aware of the attention he attracted in his vigilante outfit. He quickened his pace toward the main building, determined to find 𝐻𝐻𝐸𝐻𝐸's office. Just as he began to feel lost, he unexpectedly ran into 𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐻𝐸, who recognized his confusion and gestured for Kage to follow him. They walked in silence for a few minutes until they arrived at a large door marked examiner's room. Upon entering, Kage observed the other heroes present. Midnight leaned against a wall, conversing with present Mike, who sat on a couch beside Snipe. Next to him was 𝐻𝐻𝐸𝐻 smiled at Kage, expressing his delight at the vigilante's arrival. The other teachers turned their attention to Kage, their expressions filled with confusion. Noticing their reaction, 𝐻𝐻𝐸𝐻 redirected his smile toward them. My esteemed faculty, you may have heard of the vigilante Kage. He has been creating quite a stir for our local police force recently. The teachers exchanged bewildered glances before erupting into murmurs of surprise and curiosity. Kage chose to ignore their chatter. He had more pressing matters at hand. He approached 𝐻𝐻𝐸𝐻, standing before the principal with a raised eyebrow beneath his goggles. Can you please explain why you summoned me here so I can leave? While Kage would have preferred to stay and observe the exams, he felt uneasy in 𝐻𝐻𝐸𝐻's presence. The principal's keen intellect made Kage wary, sensing that 𝐻𝐻𝐸𝐻 was already analyzing him, attempting to unravel his secrets. This was a game to 𝐻𝐻𝐸𝐻, and Kage had no interest in participating, especially if the stakes involved his identity. Clearing his throat, he took a seat across from the principal, maintaining his gaze on the small creature before him. 𝐻𝐻𝐸𝐻 continued to smile. I invited you here today because I have a proposal for you. Kage raised an eyebrow, skeptical of what 𝐻𝐻𝐸𝐻 could possibly offer him. Undeterred, 𝐻𝐻𝐸𝐻 pressed on. In the past, UA's Hero Corps students have been. 𝐻𝐻𝐸𝐻 paused, his expression souring, lacking. Kage couldn't suppress a snort, his voice modifier distorting the sound. When 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐻 looked at him with curiosity, Kage shook his head, smirking. Apologies, but lacking is an understatement. Didn't 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐸 expel his entire class last year? 𝐒𝐮𝐻 hesitated before nodding. Yes. How you know this is a mystery, but I won't inquire further. What I seek from you is teaching. Kage stared at him, puzzled. Teaching. I recognize your expertise, 𝐒𝐮𝐻 continued, a slight smile on his face. I was hoping you would consider assisting the hero core students with their training, particularly the first years. This year, there are some promising students, but having someone with your experience would be invaluable. Many aspiring heroes rely too heavily on their quirks in combat, and I believe you could help them improve significantly. Kage frowned, contemplating the offer. It was intriguing. After a moment of consideration, he made his decision. Fine, but I have a few conditions. 𝐒𝐮𝐻 nodded, clearly pleased with Kage's swift agreement. Please go ahead. First, the mask remains on at all times. I have no intention of revealing my identity to everyone at the school. 𝐒𝐮𝐻 nodded in understanding, prompting Kage to continue. Second, no personal questions from you. I prefer to keep my life private. 𝐒𝐮𝐻 hesitated for a moment but eventually nodded. Kage sighed. And finally, I want to maintain my nightly patrols. I won't allow the people in this city to suffer while I sit around teaching high school students. 𝐒𝐮𝐻 frowned but did not object. He nodded before turning to the large screen that dominated the front wall of the examiner's room. Suddenly, a loud boom echoed from outside, causing Kage to jump. He turned to the screen and saw smoke rising from one of the exam sites. Moments later, a figure emerged from the smoke, eyes gleaming with a familiar, unsettling smile that sent a shiver down Kage's spine. This was not good. Of all the candidates trying out for UA, why did it have to be him? 𝐾𝐿. That was a name Kage had not heard in some time. He pondered how the fiery blonde was faring. The last encounter had been harsh, with 𝐒𝐵𝐻𝐻 telling him to end his life. Perhaps he had changed since then, but Kage remained skeptical. It seemed unlikely that anyone could transform so drastically. Why did it have to be 𝐾𝐿? 5 years old. 𝐾𝐿's quirk was impressive, and Izuku admired it greatly. 𝐒𝐵𝐻𝐻 beamed as he demonstrated his abilities, sending small explosions into the sky. Izuku clapped and laughed, captivated by the display of power. It was evident that 𝐾𝐿 would possess a strong quirk, just as he always had. With a joyful laugh, the spiky-haired boy expressed his excitement about their future as heroes together. 6 years old. 𝐒𝐮𝐻𝐻 was momentarily stunned by the doctor's words. Her beloved child, who had always been so full of life, now wore a frown. Confusion clouded Izuku's face. He couldn't be quirkless, it simply didn't make sense. The doctor must have been mistaken. The following day at school, 𝐒𝐵𝐻𝐻 and the others avoided him, treating him as if he were contagious. Quirkless. 11 years old. Izuku bore many burns, but fortunately, they were hidden beneath his jacket. He didn't want to add to his mother's worries. She had already endured enough. The walk home from school had transformed from a joyful journey filled with laughter to a lonely trek. At least he was free from harassment. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered his thoughts. He looked up to see a plume of smoke rising from a house a few blocks away. His house. Panic surged through him as he sprinted toward the scene. What had happened? Was it an accident or a villain's doing? Rounding the corner, he was met with a devastating sight, his home engulfed in flames. A villain stood outside, and there was 𝐼𝐻𝐻, seemingly indifferent. As he apprehended the culprit without attempting to extinguish the fire. Sirens wailed in the distance, but Izuku ignored them, rushing into the inferno. Where was his mother? The kitchen was thick with smoke. He covered his mouth with his shirt, coughing as he searched for any sign of her. Finally, he reached her room. His heart sank at the sight of her lying on the floor, struggling to breathe. He rushed forward, but before he could reach her, a loud creak echoed through the room. Suddenly, part of the ceiling collapsed, landing heavily on his mother. Izuku stood frozen in horror, watching as a dark pool formed beneath the debris. A sob escaped him, and he fell to the ground, tears streaming down his face as smoke filled his lungs. He remained there, surrounded by flames, oblivious to the burning fabric against his skin or the pain searing through him. He didn't notice when a hand grasped his shoulder, lifting him away from the chaos. He was unaware of being placed in an ambulance or rushed to the hospital. The presence of the 𝐒𝐿𝐬s visiting him went unnoticed. Trapped in his mind, he replayed the moment of his mother's demise repeatedly. He felt powerless, unable to save even one person. He had been too weak. A week later, Izuku was released from the hospital, his arms and back marked by burns. His voice would carry a slight rasp from the smoke inhalation, but the doctors assured him it could have been far worse. That was the last day anyone had seen Izuku Midoriya. 9 months later, reports began to surface about a mysterious figure leaping across the city, taking down criminals and villains alike. No one knew who he was or what he looked like. The police dubbed him 𝐾𝐿 after he left a note and a glitter bomb at the scene of one of his escapades. From that moment on, Kage became a familiar presence in Mustafu. Occasionally, someone would catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure outside their window, but by the time they looked again, he would be gone. Kage had memories of 𝐒𝐿𝐬, but he wondered if 𝐒𝐿𝐬 remembered Izuku. Did he recall the little green-haired boy whose eyes sparkled like the sun? The freckled boy he had bullied for years? The boy he had once cruelly told to end his life? No, he wouldn't remember. Izuku had been a fleeting part of 𝐒𝐿𝐬's life, and there was no reason for him to think about him. There was no reason for him to glance twice at every teenager with green hair, hoping it was his long-lost friend. No reason for him to feel a pang of regret every time he unleashed his explosions, recalling the pain he had caused. Kaken would not remember his Deku. Finally, the exams concluded. It was no surprise to Kage that 𝐒𝐿𝐬 had placed in the top 3, but it did make him uneasy. There would be no avoiding 𝐒𝐿𝐬 now that Kage was helping to teach the hero core students. But it wasn't as if Kaken would recognize him. Nothing could possibly go wrong. Kage grimaced as he pulled the phone away from his ear. He had delayed telling Mei about his new job, knowing her reaction would be explosive. Once she paused her outburst, he sighed and returned the phone to his ear. He explained that he would be assisting in training the hero core students this year, reiterating that he had already mentioned it multiple times. He reminded her that she didn't need to shout. After a moment of silence, Mei huffed in response. She was excited about the prospect of seeing each other every day now. Once she made it into the UA support course, she could create new gear for him. Kage smiled as he gazed out over the city. Sitting on the edge of a rooftop might have been risky for an ordinary person, but Kage was far from ordinary. The city was quiet, with only a few cars passing below. He hadn't encountered many criminals that night, which was unusual but not unheard of. Honestly, Kage appreciated the break from life-threatening situations. He could simply sit outside, chatting with his friend and enjoying the peaceful night. However, others were experiencing less fortunate evenings. A problem arose, and Shigaraki sighed as he turned to the newcomer. The bar was dimly lit, with only a few flickering lights illuminating the corners. He sat slouched over the counter, an empty glass in hand. The man in the doorway was tall, with spiky black hair and scars covering his face and arms. Shigaraki sighed again, gripping his glass tightly. It was 𝐷𝐵 bringing unwelcome news. 𝐷𝐵 seemed to be catching his breath, and Shigaraki impatiently tapped his fingers on the counter. After a moment, 𝐷𝐵 straightened up, breathing heavily. He mentioned that it was about a kid. Shigaraki froze, his fingers pausing mid-tap. He knew exactly which kid 𝐷𝐵 referred to, the one who had been a thorn in his side for nearly a year. The only kid to have ever escaped from the league. Midoriya. Shigaraki's voice turned sharp as he demanded to know more. 𝐷𝐵 looked nervous, trying to regain his composure after rushing to deliver the news. He revealed that Midoriya would be at UA this year. Shigaraki's chair squeaked as he jumped to his feet, the empty glass in his hand disintegrating. He exclaimed in disbelief, causing 𝐷𝐵 to step back, looking apprehensive. Just then, another voice chimed in, drawing both men's attention. A short girl with fierce eyes and messy blonde buns smiled, revealing sharp canines in the dim light. She suggested that this could be a good opportunity to eliminate 2 annoyances at once, possibly in a single day. Shigaraki paused, contemplating her words before slumping back into his chair with a scowl. Toga was right, this could be advantageous. All three villains had been hoping to encounter the green-haired boy again. He reluctantly agreed to continue with their plans, asserting that it wouldn't change anything for him and might even simplify their objectives. Toga beamed, hopping out of her chair and skipping toward the door where 𝐼𝐸 stood. He nodded in agreement before they both exited. Shigaraki turned back to the bar, reaching for his glass before remembering it was gone. He grumbled a curse, sweeping the remnants onto the floor. It was for the best this way, it would streamline their entire plan. Shigaraki glanced at the translucent figure before him. 𝐾𝐮𝐲𝐿's glowing yellow eyes and purple form lacked a distinct shape. The disintegration villain scowled at the bartender, knowing 𝐾𝐮𝐲𝐿 was right, but doubts lingered. What if this disrupted everything? What if the troublesome teen interfered? What if Shigaraki couldn't defeat All Might? An evil smile crept onto his face. He didn't need to kill All Might. He didn't need to do anything. He could simply sit back and watch the chaos unfold. This was going to be entertaining. It was amusing to observe the reactions of the various hero classes when a well-known vigilante entered their classroom. Some students stared in shock, others attempted to use their quirks against him, while a few simply sat in confusion, unsure of why everyone else was in a frenzy. Kage had begun with the third years, then moved on to the second years. He wasn't there to assist them with training as they were already quite skilled, but 𝐼𝐻 thought it would be beneficial for him to see how the other classes operated before he met the first years. Kage appreciated this arrangement, as he was apprehensive about facing the first years and wanted to delay it for as long as possible. Before long, he found himself in the first-year wing, watching students pass by on their way to classes. Fortunately, his first class was expected to be straightforward. Taking a deep breath, he entered classroom 1H. Upon entering, he was immediately met with a loud explosion. Coughing, he waved the smoke away from his face. He could easily guess who was responsible for the commotion. Scanning the room, he spotted a familiar mop of pink hair. Mei was precariously balanced on a chair, trying to avoid falling as she tinkered with what appeared to be support gear. The cause of the explosion would remain a mystery, but Kage found comfort in the familiar chaos that Mei brought. He approached her and lightly tapped her shoulder, barely suppressing a smile. He suggested that perhaps she should refrain from blowing up the entire school. Mei blinked at him for a moment before grinning mischievously. She had already promised to pretend not to know him, so he felt secure that she wouldn't reveal his identity. Contrary to what others might believe, Mei was quite adept at keeping secrets, mainly because she enjoyed knowing things that others did not. The pink-haired teenager hopped down from the chair, her face smeared with grime from the recent explosion, yet her smile remained intact. Winking at him conspiratorially, she turned and walked over to one of the work desks. Diverting his attention from Mei, Kage glanced around at the other dozen or so students in the classroom. None of them stood out to him, but a frown creased his face as he noticed someone was missing. Just then, the classroom door swung open, revealing a short man in the doorway. He appeared quite ordinary, except for the large excavator claw on his head. Kage's frown faded. This was 𝐼𝐻𝐿. The excavation hero entered the classroom, smiling at the students. When his gaze landed on Kage, his smile broadened. He approached the vigilante and extended a hand. After a moment of hesitation, Kage took it, giving a slight shake. 𝐼𝐻𝐿's voice was cheerful as he welcomed Kage. He expressed his pleasure at having Kage in his class and hoped he wouldn't mind the visit. Kage smiled beneath his mask, assuring him that it was a welcome break from the hero course. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Mei smirking. They both understood that Kage was not particularly eager about the first-year hero course students. 𝐼𝐻𝐿 released his hand and moved to the front of the classroom, addressing the students. Since it was only the 5th day of class, he announced that they could enjoy a free work PRD. They were encouraged to work on projects of interest, as long as they were not too loud or dangerous. The hero shot a pointed look at Mei, who didn't even pretend to look ashamed. Once the students began their work, 𝐼𝐻𝐿 turned back to Kage, suggesting he could walk around and observe the students. Kage nodded and began to stroll around the classroom. He watched as 2 students played with a small robot, making it fly around the room and shoot harmless beams at a girl in the corner. The girl retaliated by launching a harmless substance at the robot from a device attached to her wrist. Kage smiled as the three engaged in playful banter, tossing things back and forth. Suddenly, he heard a voice behind him. May inquired if he was excited to see Class 1. Groaning inwardly, Kage turned to face her. She was back to tinkering with the support gear she had previously blown up, pulling out wires and adding sheets of thin metal. Her smirk was full of mischief, and her eyes sparkled with excitement. Kage sighed, taking a seat next to her. None of the other students seemed to notice him, so he felt it was safe to converse with May. He claimed he had no idea what she was talking about. May glared at him, nearly smashing her finger with a hammer. She cursed softly and returned to her work. She then mentioned a friend of his, asking if he remembered the name 𝐾𝐿. Kage responded with a playful remark, and May playfully struck him on the back of the head with a wrench. He yelped, lightly hitting her arm in return, which only made her laugh. She clarified that his friend's name was 𝐒𝐵𝐸 and insisted that he should want to see him. May frowned, fiddling with a wire. She pointed out that he had seemed excited about it the day before, questioning whether he was just nervous. She admitted she couldn't tell the difference between the two emotions. Kage sighed again, resting his face in his hands. Why did May have to be so perceptive? It was true that he felt nervous about seeing 𝐒𝐵𝐸 again, but he couldn't deny there was a hint of excitement as well, even if 𝐒𝐵𝐸 wouldn't recognize him. And he couldn't reveal his identity to 𝐒𝐵𝐸. Not that 𝐒𝐵𝐸 would remember him anyway. That thought both comforted and frustrated him. He wanted 𝐒𝐵𝐸 to remember him, but why? They had never truly been friends since childhood, and Kage had vanished so long ago. 𝐒𝐵𝐸 had likely forgotten all about him. It had to be All Might. All Might entered the room, brushing past Kage, who was attempting to blend into the shadows. Kage wondered why All Might was here, feeling a wave of frustration at his own bad luck. The classroom buzzed with excitement, everyone gravitating toward the hero as if he were a celestial body. All Might was the symbol of peace, beloved by all. Yet, Kage could no longer admire the blonde hero after that fateful day. At 10 years old, Izuku left the hospital, his arms wrapped in bandages that offered little relief from the pain of movement. The bandages at least prevented strangers from staring at his burns. His vision was still hazy from the smoke, but the doctors assured him it would clear up in a few days. Unfortunately, this made it difficult to navigate his surroundings. When he accidentally collided with the #1 hero, he didn't recognize him at first. It wasn't until he heard the booming voice that he realized who it was. All Might towered over him in his hero costume, his cape billowing dramatically. His smile was so wide it seemed to take up half his face, a sight that would intimidate any villain. Izuku blinked against the sunlight, gazing up at All Might. He stammered that he was fine, looking down at his shoes. On any other day he would have been thrilled to meet his favorite hero, but today was different. A secret plan was forming in his mind, one that no hero could know about, a vigilante plan. All Might expressed his relief that Izuku was okay and turned to leave. In that moment, Izuku called out to him, running after the hero. All Might paused, asking if Izuku wanted an autograph. Izuku froze, struggling to articulate his question. Finally, he asked if it was possible for someone to become a hero without a quirk. Though All Might's smile remained, a hint of sadness crossed his face as he looked down at the green-haired boy. Izuku felt a pang of dislike for the pity in All Might's eyes. When All Might finally spoke, his voice was soft, delivering the disappointing answer that it was not possible. With that, he soared into the sky, leaving Izuku behind, tears welling in his eyes. In the present day, Aizawa had gathered his class outside at ground beta, where they formed a line. The hobo hero walked down the line, calling out each student's name and quirk for the benefit of his assistants. 𝐒𝐵𝐸 almost scoffed. Here he was, face to face with All Might, yet the shorter figure beside him seemed to draw more attention. There was something familiar about the vigilante, but 𝐒𝐵𝐸 dismissed it. He had only heard stories about Kage from his friends and was unimpressed. He had expected someone larger, not a slender figure in a hoodie and 𝐒𝐵𝐸 found himself curious about Kage's gear, which looked professionally made. He doubted Kage had access to the materials needed to create such equipment. Who would assist a wanted vigilante in crafting support gear? It seemed like an act of madness. When Izuku called Bakugo's name, he thought he saw Kage flinch, but a quick glance revealed the vigilante was composed. It was probably just a trick of the light. Izuku finished his list and faced the students, announcing that they would be engaging in combat training. Each student would either face Kage alone or team up with a partner to take on All Might. Bakugo scoffed at the idea of needing a partner, confident he could defeat All Might on his own. However, he was assigned to fight Kage and had to wait until last. As he watched the earlier matches, he felt boredom creeping in. The first pairs faced All Might, with Pinky and Shitty Hair losing, followed by Headphones and Dunce Face. When it was Kage's turn, surprisingly, no one managed to defeat him, even without using a quirk. The only one who came close was Darkness, but even he fell short. Finally, it was Bakugo's turn. He stepped into the arena, observing Kage, who seemed vaguely familiar. Under the mask, Kage appeared to smile, or perhaps smirk. It was difficult to tell. The vigilante avoided making eye contact, which irritated Bakugo. He was determined to win effortlessly. Suddenly, Kage broke the silence, wishing Bakugo luck. Bakugo scowled, still frustrated by the lack of eye contact. He brushed off Kage's words, muttering indifferently. Kage was impressively skilled, managing to evade every one of Bakugo's explosions with apparent ease. This infuriated Bakugo, as no one had ever been able to avoid his attacks for this long. Finally, the furious blonde managed to land a hit, albeit by accident. He had been charging directly at Kage when the vigilantes suddenly leaped into the air. On impulse, Bakugo raised his hands and unleashed explosions above him. He heard a hiss, and when he turned, he found Kage on his knees, clutching his right arm with his left. It appeared that the blonde had struck him, but only on the arm. When Kage released his grip on his right arm, Bakugo was taken aback by the sight of burn scars that covered his skin. The sleeve of his hoodie had partially burned away, exposing the bare skin of his forearm, which was marred by numerous scars. Most of them looked like burns, but a few appeared to be from blades. Bakugo was so captivated by Kage's arm that he didn't notice when the vigilante stood up and approached him, pushing him back a few steps. Bakugo stumbled, glaring up at Kage, who simply stared back. They finally locked eyes, and there was a familiar look in Kage's gaze that Bakugo couldn't quite place. Kage's voice was flat as he stated that Bakugo was out of bounds before turning and walking away, leaving Bakugo stunned. Had he? But it had all happened so quickly. Why had he allowed himself to be distracted by the scars? If he were honest, the scars reminded him of someone from his past. An old friend he hadn't seen in years. Bakugo recalled that day at the hospital. At 10 years old, he had jumped up from his spot on the couch, completely forgetting his homework. He had been waiting for 3 days for news of Izuku, and now he was finally going to see him. A weight always settled in his chest when he thought about the green-haired boy. Bakugo had so much he wished to say, but he had always been too much of a coward to express it. To apologize. They arrived at the hospital around noon, and it was surprisingly busy for a weekend. Apparently, the villain who had caused all the trouble for the Midoriya family had ruined several other lives before being caught. Bakugo's fists clenched as he recalled the heat of the flames on his skin, a burning sensation reminiscent of his own quirk. He hadn't slept much in the last few days, as every time he closed his eyes, the image of Izuku sitting in the burning doorway of his mother's room haunted him. He couldn't shake Izuku's expression from his mind, no matter how hard he tried. Entering Izuku's hospital room, he walked a little behind his mother. The green-haired boy sat in a hospital bed, dressed in a t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair a tangled mess of curls. Bakugo barely noticed the burns and scars on his arms, though they would likely invade his dreams for weeks. All he could focus on were Izuku's eyes. They were so... It was probably for the best anyway. Before long, Kage found himself standing outside his last class of the day. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the classroom door open. Inside, 20 students sat in chairs arranged in neat rows of 5. Out of the corner of his eye, Kage noticed a boy with spiky blonde hair engrossed in a book. He chose to ignore him. At the front of the classroom stood 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐸, who nodded in Kage's direction before addressing the class. He introduced Kage as someone who would assist in training them in non-quirk combat, mentioning that their other assistant teacher would arrive shortly. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the door, drawing everyone's attention. Kage's heart sank. Just when he thought his luck couldn't worsen, the door swung open. A boisterous voice announced the arrival of the newcomer. Numbly, 𝐒𝐿 observed as the freckled boy turned to face them, seemingly looking through them as if they were invisible. The blond boy shivered and stepped forward, reaching out his hand uncertainly. However, Izuku flinched back, a flicker of fear crossing his face. Guilt surged within 𝐒𝐿, overwhelming him. He attempted to meet Izuku's gaze, but the green-haired boy avoided him. 𝐒𝐿 opened his mouth to apologize, to express his remorse for everything he had done, but no words came out. Just then, he felt a tug on his wrist and looked up to see his mother smiling down at him sadly. She suggested that perhaps it wasn't the right time to visit, assuring him they could return soon. 𝐒𝐿 nodded, but his mind was in turmoil. He couldn't leave yet. He hadn't apologized or acknowledged the hurt he had caused. Numbly, he followed his mother out of the hospital and into her car. Their drive home was silent, the unspoken words hanging heavily in the air. 𝐒𝐿 tried to shake off the unease as the hospital faded from view. He would have another chance to see Izuku and make things right. That chance never came. A few days later, 𝐒𝐿's mother received a call from the hospital. Izuku had been released and was seen heading toward their house. Mitsuki waited by the door, a smile on her face, with 𝐒𝐿 sitting beside her. They waited for hours. Izuku never arrived. No one had seen him since. In the present, Kage pressed a hand to his side, feeling the discomfort of stretched stitches against his skin. He should have been more cautious during training, but he had fallen back into his usual pattern of overpowering each opponent. But at what cost? 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐸 noticed Kage's discomfort and asked if he was alright, but Kage waved him off. He certainly did not want to end up in the hospital again for something as trivial as torn stitches. The class continued as usual, with Kage observing from the sidelines. All might had vanished, and 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐸 had paired the students for sparring. Kage couldn't help but watch 𝐒𝐿, who was sparring with a red-haired boy he remembered as Kirishima. The angry blonde seemed to be calling him a rather unflattering nickname. Kage snorted to himself. That was very much a Kaken thing to do. 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐸 kept giving Kage odd looks throughout the day, and when class finally ended and the students were dismissed, the teacher approached Kage slowly. He suggested that Kage should see Recovery Girl, noting his pain. Kage frowned, insisting he was fine and did not need a doctor. However, as he attempted to stand, he felt a few stitches in his side rib. He stumbled and 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐸 caught him. Kage pressed a hand to his side, feeling blood seeping through his hoodie. Why did this have to happen today of all days? He tried to wave 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐸 off, but his head began to spin. Frustrated, he felt himself being lifted into the air, heading toward the main building of UA. Of course, this was the perfect moment for him to lose consciousness. Izuku was in a dark room, flames coursing up his arms and engulfing his body. He struggled to breathe. In front of him lay a pool of dark liquid, blood. A figure emerged from the pool, covered in the same dark substance. The only discernible feature was her bright green eyes, which shone ominously, filling him with dread. The figure spoke, accusing him of failing to save her, of being useless. The weight of those words hung heavily in the air, echoing in Izuku's mind. Kage sat up with a gasp, his vision gradually returning. He found himself in an unfamiliar room that resembled a hospital, and panic surged within him. He despised hospitals. As he attempted to stand, his entire body trembled. His clothes were drenched in sweat, and he shivered uncontrollably. In the back of his mind, he recognized that he was likely experiencing a panic attack. That was not a good sign. He pressed his back against the wall, trying to catch his breath. Distantly, Kage heard the door to the room open, and hurried footsteps approached him. He struggled to breathe. In a moment of desperation, Kage yanked the mask from his face, gasping for air. He had lost his goggles, leaving his face exposed to the newcomer. He didn't care, he just needed to feel free. A hand rested on his shoulder, and he looked up to see 𝐼𝐬𝐽 kneeling beside him, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. 𝐼𝐬𝐽's voice cut through the chaos in Kage's mind, bringing him a sense of calm. It was okay. He was safe. He just needed to breathe. Kage let out a shaky laugh, feeling the absurdity of his situation. After a few moments, his heart rate slowed, and his breathing steadied. He slid down to the floor, numbly fiddling with the mask in his hand. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 seemed to notice for the first time that Kage's face was bare, his hood pushed back to reveal a wild mess of green curls. That probably wasn't a good sign. In the common room of the dorms, Bakugo sighed, resting his head on the table. His friends had been discussing Kage for nearly 30 minutes, and it seemed they were finally seeking his input. He turned his head slightly to glance at his friends, who were looking at him expectantly. He scowled in response. Why should he waste his time trying to figure out some random person's quirk? It didn't matter anyway. His friend frowned, but another simply rolled her eyes and turned her attention to the others lounging on the couch. One boy appeared to be asleep, his head resting on the shoulder of another. The awake boy smirked at Bakugo before redirecting his focus back to the conversation. Perhaps Kage had a mental quirk, similar to Shin's, something that wouldn't be easily noticeable in a fight. The girl nodded, perching herself on the arm of a chair while the boy took a seat in the actual part of the chair. He seemed deep in thought before finally speaking, prompting the others to look at him. What if Kage didn't have a quirk at all? The girl frowned, considering his words before shaking her head. Did he really think someone without a quirk could be that skilled? Bakugo hadn't meant to speak aloud, but the word had slipped out. He scowled as his friends turned to him, their expressions ranging from confusion to curiosity. The girl leaned closer, resting her head on her elbows on the table, a mischievous smile on her face. And how would he know? Did he have any close friends who were quirkless? Another friend snorted, making a joke about Bakugo's social life, which only earned him a glare. Bakugo turned back to the girl, still scowling. Then, muttering under his breath, he added that he didn't have any friends anymore. The girl frowned but didn't press the subject, shifting her attention back to the others. Well, she believed Kage must have some kind of agility quirk. Otherwise, how could he have outmaneuvered everyone so effortlessly? She jumped onto the couch next to the sleeping boy, startling him awake. With hands on her hips, she declared her determination to uncover Kage's quirk. Of course, her bold statement quickly devolved into a bet. $20 that she couldn't figure it out by the end of the year. She smirked, reaching out to shake hands with the boy beside her. The insomniac shook his head, and Bakugo shared his feeling of weary defeat. Kaminari never won bets. The four of them began to argue, and Bakugo tuned them out, returning to his homework with a groan. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake thoughts of Kage from his mind. What if Kage really was quirkless? It wasn't too hard to believe, and it would explain why he relied so much on support gear. Bakugo pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on his math. When the girl figured out Kage's quirk, she would undoubtedly share it with him and everyone else. He doubted it would take her long to uncover it. Give it 3 weeks. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 frowned down at the vigilante beside him. It was difficult to see Kage as just that, especially after having seen his face. The green-haired boy had looked so panicked when he realized he was unmasked that 𝐼𝐬𝐽 felt a pang of sympathy. He wanted to treat Kage like one of his students, but something told him the vigilante wouldn't appreciate it. Still, since Kage was the same age as his students, it seemed only fair for him to live in the dorms with them. The large dorm building loomed ahead, a sign reading Class 1A prominently displayed. Kage gulped, glancing up at the building with worry. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 sensed the panic rising within him but couldn't understand why. Don't worry. He wouldn't have to remove his mask if he didn't want to. The others would still perceive him as an adult. Numbly, Kage nodded, shaking off his nerves before stepping into the dorm building. It was empty since the 1A students were in class, and this fact seemed to calm the vigilante. Kage felt a sense of reluctance as he prepared to face the students, particularly one fiery blonde who was sure to be upset. He quickly ascended the stairs to the bedroom levels, finding an empty room at the end of the hall. Upon opening the door, he stepped inside and was taken aback to see that it mirrored his room at the cafe. His extra medical supplies were neatly arranged in a corner beside the bed. He turned to 𝐼𝐬𝐬, casting a suspicious glance at the hero. He was puzzled and demanded to know how 𝐼𝐬𝐬 had managed this. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 simply smirked, indicating he had his methods. Kage frowned but chose not to press the issue further. He pushed 𝐼𝐬𝐬 out of the room and closed the door behind him. With a singular focus, he set about cleaning himself up. It had been 2 days since his last shower, and his clothes bore the remnants of his recent struggles. His only thoughts were to get clean and rest. Time passed, and Kage found himself eating lunch in the teacher's lounge when an alarm suddenly blared. The other teachers around him stood up, bewildered. Kage turned to 𝐼𝐬𝐬, who was already on his feet and moving toward the door leading to the school grounds. Intrigued, Kage followed him to discover the source of the disturbance. Upon reaching the gate of UA, Kage's attention was drawn to a throng of cameramen and reporters crowding the entrance. Normally, a thick gate would have secured this area, but it was conspicuously absent. From a distance, Kage observed as 𝐼𝐬𝐬 and a few other teachers worked to disperse the crowd. As he stepped closer, he noticed ash scattered on the ground. Kneeling down for a better look, his eyes widened in realization. Only one individual he knew possessed the power to reduce the entire gate to dust. Kage rose to his feet, scanning the surrounding city for any signs of what might have occurred. The atmosphere felt heavy, suffocating. The crimson liquid around the figure's feet began to bubble, rising and enveloping the room. It surged over Izuku, filling his mouth with a metallic taste. He struggled to breathe as the liquid flowed down his throat, invading his lungs. He gasped, trying to break free. He was suspended in the liquid that had overtaken the space. Vision blurred, sounds faded, and a searing heat coursed along his skin, seemingly fueled by the very substance surrounding him. He felt as though he was drowning, and he believed it was all his doing. A purple portal closed around a man who was gazing directly at him. Kage trembled, unable to look away as the portal vanished. A hand rested on his shoulder, and he glanced up to see 𝐼𝐬𝐬 looking down at him with concern. The vigilante quickly masked his expression, returning the frown. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 opened his mouth to speak, but Kage interrupted him. He insisted he was fine, his tone clipped and his expression unreadable as he turned away, heading back to the dorms. He needed to arrange a meeting with someone, and soon. I would say it's good to see you, Izuku, but that wouldn't be true. Izuku chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. The man before him had dark hair that fell into his face and skin that appeared almost translucent. At times, it seemed as if his skull was just beneath the surface. You know why I'm here? Jack nodded, retrieving a fortune cookie from his pocket. Izuku sighed. Jack's penchant for conveying information through riddles was becoming tiresome. The green-haired boy reached out, snatching the cookie before standing up and moving toward the restaurant's exit. Jack's voice halted him. For what it's worth, none of us were aware of the UA incident. Shigaraki didn't share that plan with us. Izuku acknowledged this with a nod, not bothering to look back. He advised Jack and his companions to be more cautious, or they risked getting caught. Once outside, he pulled the fortune cookie from his pocket, cracked it open, and extracted the small slip of paper inside. It contained a single line. Is it irony or is it destiny? But the day when heroes rescue someone is the same day they themselves need saving. Izuku frowned, reading and rereading the words. This riddle was even less helpful than usual. He shoved the paper back into his pocket, letting the crumbled cookie fall to the ground. He adjusted his mask and secured his goggles. He would ponder the riddle later. Right now, he had a mission to complete. Mustafu still required a vigilante. Tsukachi's voice came through the phone, sounding more fatigued than usual. He was informed that there were updates regarding the vigilante issue. Tsukachi perked up, having not heard from 𝐼𝐬𝐬𝐬 in nearly a week, which had caused him some concern. Kage, the vigilante, had also been less active lately. The anticipation grew as he awaited 𝐼𝐬𝐬𝐬's revelation. 𝐼𝐬𝐬𝐬 confirmed that he knew the identity of the vigilante. Izuku was approached by Yui, who asked him to manage the cafe for a short while as she needed to pick up Kage from school. He agreed, feeling confident since the cafe was quiet, with only a couple of customers enjoying their tea. After Yui left, Izuku turned to the entrance, expecting the bell to ring as the door closed, but instead, silence enveloped him. His heart sank as Aizawa entered, followed closely by Tsukachi. Tsukachi greeted Izuku, indicating that they needed to have a serious discussion. Izuku nodded and gestured for them to follow him to the back room, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. Once the door was shut, Izuku confronted Aizawa, questioning whether he had disclosed his secret to Tsukachi. Aizawa met his gaze without remorse, explaining that it was necessary for Tsukachi to know, given that Izuku was a wanted vigilante and still a minor. Izuku turned his attention to Tsukachi, who had taken a seat at the back desk, still wearing a warm smile that did little to ease Izuku's anxiety. He settled behind the desk, while Aizawa remained close, his focus unwavering on Izuku. Tsukachi leaned forward, preparing to speak. Izuku avoided eye contact, but eventually met the detective's gaze, feeling the weight of the moment. Tsukachi's demeanor was fatherly, which only heightened Izuku's nerves. He hoped the conversation would conclude swiftly. Tsukachi was taken aback by the revelations. Kage had been less than forthcoming, and it shocked him to discover that the vigilante causing the police so much trouble was just a child, the same age as Aizawa's students. He reviewed his notes and looked at Aizawa, who remained fixated on Izuku. Izuku asked if he was going to be arrested, his smile faltering and his expression weary. Each inquiry seemed to add more pressure on him, making him sink deeper into his chair. Tsukachi tried to reassure him, but the response he received was a frown. Tsukachi clarified that Izuku would not be arrested. This revelation surprised both Izuku and Aizawa, who exchanged confused glances. Tsukachi explained that Izuku was still underage, and being quirkless meant he could not be charged with vigilantism. Moreover, both Mustafu and Yue needed him, and it would be unjust to arrest him. He decided to overlook the situation for now but had one request. Izuku's interest piqued, feeling a slight relief from the detective's words. He inquired about the request, and Tsukachi expressed his longing for Izuku to work towards obtaining a hero license. Izuku frowned, expressing his doubts about achieving that goal without a quirk. Tsukachi remained optimistic, encouraging him that he would find a way. He concluded the conversation, stating that he would be in touch with Izuku. Izuku was taken aback by Tsukachi's knowledge of his situation, but the detective expressed his relief that Izuku was safe. They shook hands, and Izuku offered a faint smile. As Tsukachi exited the cafe, he chuckled softly. Aizawa looked at him curiously, and the detective simply shook his head, a smile lingering on his face. It was a pleasant surprise to know that Izuku Midoriya was alive. Kurojirai inquired if everything was prepared, surrounded by a swirl of purple smoke. Shigaraki grinned, satisfied with the unfolding events. Soon, the heroes needed to be prepared. The USJ was an impressive structure, its dome towering over Class 1A as they disembarked from the bus, chatting and laughing among themselves. Kage was the last to step off, trailing behind Aizawa. He felt a sense of responsibility for the students, even if it felt a bit odd since they were the same age. As they entered the glass-covered dome, Kage spotted the rescue hero 13 standing before them. Internally, he felt a rush of excitement. 13 was one of his favorite heroes. Their powerful quirk, dedicated to rescuing and saving others, was truly inspiring. Kage shook his head, attempting to focus on Aizawa's words, but he found himself distracted by the surroundings. The facility featured at least 7 distinct training areas, each with unique terrains. He noticed a lake, some crumbled buildings, a mountain, and what appeared to be an old amusement park among them. Initially, he had been reluctant about this trip, but now he wished he could train as well. However, something nagged at him, as if he had all the pieces of a puzzle but hadn't quite fit them together yet. He decided to set that thought aside for now. It probably wasn't crucial at the moment. The extras were bickering again. Aizawa had stopped explaining the plan and was now moving around, organizing everyone into groups. Bakugo found himself paired with Dunce Face, Shitty Hair, and Pinky. Tape Face had been separated from them, and there had been quite a scene before Aizawa managed to calm them down with a threat of sending them back to school. Now, the 3 members of the so-called Baku squad were arguing about Kage's quirk, naturally. Pinky insisted it was a mental quirk, while Shitty Hair argued it was something physical, pointing to Kage's agility. Dunce's face chimed in, suggesting that Kage could be quirkless, which prompted laughter from Pinky. Kage observed as Pinky approached Bakugo, placing a hand on his shoulder with a knowing smile. She inquired about a quirkless person Bakugo had mentioned before, asking for details about them. Bakugo glared at her initially but eventually relented, revealing that the person's name was Izuku and that he had been a childhood friend. Kage noticed Aizawa tense slightly at the mention of Izuku, but when Bakugo glanced over, Aizawa was already moving toward him. Bakugo returned his focus to Mina, who looked concerned. Mina asked why Bakugo spoke about Izuku as if he were gone. Bakugo's response was sharper than intended, causing her to flinch. He recalled the police officers who had declared Izuku missing and presumed dead after 3 months. But he refused to accept that. Izuku had simply left 3 years ago. He chose not to mention the details of Izuku's disappearance, not wanting his friends to pry further. Mina seemed to sense she had crossed a line, nodding before returning to the others to rejoin the argument. Kage flinched when Aizawa confronted him, questioning why he hadn't mentioned knowing Bakugo. Kage explained that he had known Bakugo in the past, but it had been 3 years since they last saw each other, and he doubted Bakugo remembered him. Aizawa sighed, indicating that Kage would need to share the full story later. Suddenly, they heard shouting and commotion. Turning around, they saw purple portals opening around the students, and figures emerging from them. Kage instinctively took a step back, and Aizawa glanced down at him, noticing his expression of fear. The sight of the villains stepping through the portals was enough to raise alarm. One man, dressed in a black sweatshirt and breathes, stepped forward. He appeared normal at first glance, but Kage recognized the severed hands clinging to his arms and even one on his face. This was the man who had caused him immense suffering, the one who had nearly taken his life countless times, Shigaraki. In that moment, a realization struck Kage. The lines from the fortune cookie echoed in his mind. Is it irony or is it destiny? But the day where heroes rescue someone is the same day that they themselves need rescue. Jack had been trying to warn him about this attack, and he had completely overlooked it. Kage felt a surge of determination as he faced the formidable presence of Shigaraki, who was lost in a monologue. The Vigilante stood frozen for a moment, memories flooding his mind, but he quickly shook them off. The students behind him needed him. He stepped forward, pushing through the stunned classmates who were all gazing at the villain in shock. Positioning himself as a barrier between them and Shigaraki, he glared fiercely at the blue-haired man. Shigaraki paused, his attention shifting to Kage. The hand covering his mouth did little to hide the sneer that Kage could sense. The students began to whisper amongst themselves, but Shigaraki's focus remained on Kage. Kage felt a jolt of annoyance as Shigaraki addressed him with a nickname from their past. Memories threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced them aside. He had to concentrate on protecting the students. With a defiant tone, Kage challenged Shigaraki, suggesting he retreat through Kuri's portal and forget the confrontation. Shigaraki's scowl deepened, but Kage couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction at having irritated the villain. It indicated that Shigaraki hadn't changed, and Kage could use that to his advantage. Kage pressed on, taunting Shigaraki to come down and face him directly, questioning whether he was afraid. Shigaraki's laughter echoed, a harsh sound that grated on Kage's nerves. He needed to redirect the conversation before Shigaraki revealed his true name. Inquiring about Shigaraki's purpose for being there, Kage was taken aback by the villain's response. Shigaraki was there to eliminate All Might, and the thought struck Kage as amusing. The villain had come expecting to confront the hero, only to find Kage instead. This unexpected twist brought Kage a sense of relief. If Shigaraki couldn't achieve his goal, it meant Kage had already gained the upper hand. Kage informed Shigaraki that All Might was not present and that he would have to settle for Kage himself. Shigaraki's expression darkened, but he revealed that he had a surprise in store for Kage. With a command, he summoned a massive creature known as Nomu. Kage's heart sank as the enormous beast emerged from the portal, larger than any Nomu he had encountered before. The creature charged past Kage, heading straight for the students before he could react. He turned just in time to see portals opening around the class, whisking them away to unknown locations. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 sprang into action, attempting to ensnare the creature with his capture scarf, but Kage knew it would be futile. Before he could warn 𝐼𝐬𝐽, the pro was sent sprawling across the area. Desperation filled Kage as he watched the Nomu turn its grotesque face toward him, a twisted semblance of a smile forming. He had never faced such a large opponent, but he reminded himself that there was always a first time for everything. As the Nomu closed in, Kage leaped over it, twisting in midair to launch his grappling hook at the creature's neck. Although it didn't pierce the skin, it wrapped around tightly, propelling Kage onto the creature's back. He secured his legs around its neck and drew his 𝐒𝐮𝐬 sticks, driving them into the creature's brain. Gritting his teeth, he pressed the button to unleash electricity, knowing that May had increased the voltage of the sticks. This turned out to be very helpful. The Nomu let out a loud cry as smoke billowed from its exposed brain. It reached behind, grabbing Kage around the waist and tossing him into the air. Before he could react, the Vigilante felt himself plummeting. Something snagged his waist, jerking him sideways and causing him to land ℟𝗟𝗘 on the deck of a ship. Blinking, he looked up at the two students standing over him, Tsuyu and 𝐮𝐭. Kage groaned, placing a hand against his ribs, which felt as if they had been broken or crushed. Wonderful. Tsuyu's voice jolted Kage from his thoughts as she asked if he was okay. He nodded, pushing himself to his feet while ignoring the sharp pain in his side. Frowning, he looked over the side of the boat. He had landed in the lake sector, and since there were students here, it meant the other class members must have been placed around the rest of the USJ. He considered their situation as Tsuyu expressed her concern about the villains in the water. Even with his sour expression, Kage could sense 𝐮𝐻's worry. But a reckless plan was already forming in his mind, something dangerous that could lead to trouble. He grinned beneath his mask. This was going to be a wild ride. Kage glanced over his shoulder at Tsuyu and 𝐮𝐻, who both nodded with serious expressions. It was almost amusing how quickly they had shifted their moods. Kage had plenty of experience in suppressing emotions. He leaped over the side of the ship, heading toward the water below. Just before hitting the surface, he dropped the compression bomb he was holding. As villains surged up to meet him, a loud bang echoed, followed by a skiing sound. The water beneath him vanished, and Kage shot the grappling hook in his other hand. He felt it make contact, swinging him up and out of the way as a whirlpool of water erupted, sending villains flying in every direction. Kage landed on a rock in the mountain sector, smiling at his handiwork. He would have to remember to thank May later for the new gadgets. A few moments later, Tsuyu and 𝐮𝐻 landed beside him, breathing heavily. Kage praised their efforts, and they nodded in response. 𝐮𝐻 managed a small smile, admitting that it had been quite fun. Kage returned the smile, suggesting they return to the others before something else happened. Suddenly, a loud boom caused the mountain beneath them to tremble. Looking uphill, Kage saw large rocks rolling down toward them, and he noticed a few students above the rocks. That was a good sign. Quickly, he turned to face the two with him. He asked Tsuyu if she could carry 𝐮𝐻 up to their classmates like she had gotten off the boat. Tsuyu nodded, but 𝐮𝐻 scowled, expressing his dislike for being carried by a tongue. Kage dismissed his complaint and urged them to go. He ran and jumped off the side of the cliff, leaving the two hero students to reconnect with their classmates. As he sailed toward the center of the USJ, the Vigilante shot his grappling hook toward the ceiling, slowing his descent and allowing him to survey the scene. What he saw was concerning. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 appeared to be struggling against Shigaraki, and near the fallen Nomu, Bakugo, Todoroki, and Kirishima were engaged in battle with three other villains, Twice, Dabi, and Toga. Just his luck. Kage landed on top of Toga, finding it amusing for a brief moment before she attempted to stab him. He jumped back, feeling a sharp pain across his already injured ribs. Gritting his teeth, he refused to show any sign of pain. Toga got to her feet, smiling at him and reminding him to be more careful, as knives could be dangerous. Bakugo, who had been fighting Toga, was not pleased about being ignored. He charged at her from behind, raising his hands to unleash an explosion. Toga dodged, causing Bakugo to rush past her. Kage caught him before he could fall, holding him back as he tried to charge again. When 𝐃𝐭𝐲 turned to glare at him, Kage returned the glare. He told 𝐃𝐭𝐲 that his approach wouldn't work any better a second time and urged him to work with him. Toga's playful voice interrupted them, drawing their attention. She still clutched the knife she had used on Kage, grinning wickedly as blood dripped from the blade. 𝐃𝐭𝐲 appeared unfazed by the words spoken, but as Toga finished, Kage launched himself at her, knocking her to the ground. Her head struck a rock, and she fell limp. Kage stood up, breathing heavily, and surveyed the chaos around him. Most of the villains had vanished, including twice. Kirishima and Todoroki were engaged in battle with 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸, successfully pushing him back toward the still open portals. But Aizawa. Kage witnessed the moment Aizawa blinked, and Shigaraki made contact. The skin on Aizawa's arm began to deteriorate, and as the hero fell to the ground with a cry, the Vigilante charged forward, swinging his arm toward Shigaraki's head. Shiggy ducked just in time, causing Kage to spin around before facing him again. Kage thought to himself that Shigaraki's comment was unkind. He swung his 𝐒𝐮𝐬 stick at Shigaraki once more, but the villain caught it effortlessly. Kage watched in horror as the stick began to disintegrate, crumbling to ash on the ground. He attempted to pull his arm back, but Shigaraki had already seized his wrist. Pain surged through Kage's arm as the blue-haired villain grinned. "There's no escape for you this time, Izuku. As you mentioned, All Might isn't here to save you." A loud boom echoed throughout the UZ. A cloud of smoke billowed from the doorway, and out of the dust strode All Might. Through the pain in his arm, Kage smirked at Shigaraki, who looked both angry and confused. "Well, what do you know? It seems that All Might is here to save me." Then he collapsed to the ground, his consciousness fading. A week after the USJ incident, Kage was released from UA's hospital wing. Recovery Girl had only needed about 3 days to heal his wounds, but she insisted he rest for a while. Now, he stood in front of Class 1A, reaching for the door handle. He recalled the first time he had entered this classroom, filled with anxiety about being discovered. But now, he felt more confident. If they hadn't figured out his identity yet, the students of Class 1A likely weren't trying to uncover it. Curiosity filled the air as students bombarded him with questions about his quirk, his past, and his age. Kage took a step back, overwhelmed by the onslaught. The students crowded around the door, eagerly awaiting his entrance. The only one absent was 𝐃𝐭𝐲, who seemed to ignore the situation entirely, lounging at his desk with his feet propped up. "Enough. Sit down." The tired but firm voice came from behind him. Kage turned to see Aizawa, though it was hard to recognize him through the bandages covering his head and arms. He stepped aside, allowing the teacher to enter the classroom. The students seemed surprised by Aizawa's early return. Aizawa moved to the front of the classroom and sat at his desk. His eyes, the only visible part of his face, appeared weary and annoyed, just as usual. "Everyone settle down. We have something important to discuss today." The class erupted into whispers, but Aizawa's glare silenced them quickly. "We need to start preparing for the upcoming sports festival." This announcement caused a commotion among the students. Some jumped up while others began to chatter excitedly. Aizawa sighed loudly, resting his head on his desk. Moments later, he began to snore. Kage stared at him in confusion for a moment before turning back to the class, realizing he was now in charge of teaching. Later, after school, Kage climbed through Mei's window, pulling off his mask. He sank onto her bed, rubbing his tired eyes. He had spent the entire day running Class 1A through training and felt utterly exhausted. Visiting his friend was the only remedy. He hadn't seen Mei much in recent weeks due to his busy schedule, and he needed someone to talk to. Mei was his best option. "So..." Izuku glanced over at the pink-haired girl, who was fiddling with something at her desk. She rolled over in her wheelie chair and propped her feet on his legs. He frowned at her, and she frowned back. "Fine. But I can't exactly go as Izuku, can I?" "You better. Otherwise it will look strange." She noticed the worry on his face and smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry, there isn't anyone there who knows you besides 𝐃𝐭𝐲, and he'll be busy competing. Plus, you might make some friends besides me, and then you won't have to crawl through my window at night to get your social fix." Izuku sighed, realizing he couldn't argue with her. It seemed he would be attending the sports festival after all. He was sure it would be fine. Nothing would go wrong, because things always went smoothly for him. Suk had not been allowed to participate in the USJ attack, which troubled him. If the League of Villains no longer trusted him, he wouldn't be able to relay information to Kage. Or worse, he could be in danger. 𝐼𝐷 sneered at him, which Suk found irritating. The other League members seemed to believe they were superior, simply because their quirks had proven useful in the past. Suk smiled to himself, plotting his next move. Little did the League know, his quirk was proving to be quite useful. As if sensing his thoughts, Jack appeared from down the hall. He nodded at 𝐼𝐷, who merely scowled before walking away. Suk pondered what it was about Todorokis and their sour attitudes. Turning to face Jack, he noticed that Jack looked fatigued. Being a ghost, he always had that weary appearance. Jack mentioned that 𝗏𝗏 had just returned with dinner and asked if Suk wanted to eat. Suk nodded, smiling as Jack extended a hand to help him up. When their skin made contact, a peculiar tingling sensation coursed through Suk's arm and into his head, echoing within his skull. It was bothersome, but it occurred every time he touched either of his skeleton friends. Since Jack and 𝗏𝗏 were merely different parts of Suk's brain that had manifested as their own skeleton entities, they shared an unusual connection. The duo walked down the hall and entered a small kitchen located behind the main room of the bar that the League of Villains used as their hideout. A large man with wild brown hair greeted Jack and Suk with a smile before revealing the food he had brought. As they ate, Jack seemed to pick up on Suk's unease. He reassured Suk that Izuku would be alright, and that they would be too. Everything was going to be fine. It felt strange for Izuku to walk into UA without his vigilante gear. He kept expecting someone to stop him and inform him that he wasn't allowed there. Gradually, he realized that no one recognized him. No one knew he was supposed to be dead, except for Kaken. That was why Izuku had brought his vigilante mask. Mei had tried to convince him that he would be fine, but the green-haired boy preferred to be cautious. Thus, his voice-changing mask was safely tucked away in the pocket of his hoodie. The crowd of people made him uneasy. He anticipated someone would see him and alert the school, but no one seemed to notice him, except for Mei. She came bounding out of the stadium, a wide smile on her face. People hurried to get out of her way as she made a beeline for Izuku, jumping at him and wrapping him in a hug with a laugh. A startled gasp escaped him as she stepped back, looking even more energetic than usual. Izuku grinned at her. Most of the time, her exuberance drained him, but at that moment, he found himself needing it. She expressed her excitement that he had come and declared that it was going to be so much fun. Izuku nodded as Mei grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the entrance. A few heroes were mingling outside, appearing as if they were supposed to be on patrol but looking rather bored. Izuku recognized 𝗟𝗏𝐿 and 𝐾𝐮𝐲𝐸 among them. He felt torn between wanting to flee and wanting to ask for their autographs, but the decision was made for him when Mei dragged him through the entrance into the stadium. Toga had a BLD quirk, and it was a serious concern for Kage. He felt a wave of panic wash over him as he realized how foolish he had been to let her get his BLD. The thought of her exposing him sent a chill down his spine. Toga taunted him, teasing about liking the blade. Kage felt a surge of determination. He had to stop her. He charged at her, pulling out an 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃 stick to strike, but when he activated it, only a faint spark flickered. Frustration bubbled within him as Toga laughed and jumped back, mocking his efforts. She continued to taunt him, suggesting he should have been born with a quirk instead of relying on his weapons. Kage needed to silence her. He swung at her, but she dodged effortlessly, still giggling. In a moment of luck, he managed to strike her wrist, causing her to drop the knife, which clattered to the ground. He called out for 𝐼𝐵𝐻𝐸 to retrieve the knife, and as 𝐼𝐵𝐻𝐸 rushed toward it, Toga's laughter echoed in the air. She seemed to find the situation amusing, glancing between Kage and 𝐵𝐻𝐸 with a mischievous glint in her eyes. Her words revealed that she knew about Kaken, which sent a wave of dread through Kage. Meanwhile, the stadium buzzed with excitement as UA students gathered. Izuku spotted familiar faces like Uraraka, Mina, Ida, and Kaminari but tried to avoid them. He felt anxious about being discovered, relieved that Bakugo was nowhere in sight. Perhaps he was running late, which was typical of him. Mei, bouncing with energy, caught Izuku's attention, asking where he would sit. He couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm, even as other students looked on with concern. Mei was a force of nature, and they had every reason to be wary. After Uraraka's loss, she felt a heavy weight on her shoulders as she spoke to her parents on the phone. Despite knowing that losing to Bakugo didn't diminish her potential as a hero, it was still difficult. She longed for the comfort of a friend. Just then, someone knocked on her door. Expecting a familiar face, she was surprised to find a shy green-haired boy standing there. He introduced himself and complimented her performance, noting that few could hold their own against Bakugo. Curious about his connection to Bakugo, Ochako invited him inside. They sat at the table, and he revealed that he and Bakugo had grown up together. He asked her not to mention their meeting to Bakugo, hinting at a complicated history. Ochako empathized with him, acknowledging Bakugo's difficult nature. The boy chuckled, admitting that Bakugo had mellowed somewhat over the years. She found herself drawn to his kind demeanor. He seemed like someone who could easily make friends. As their conversation continued, she asked for his number. He hesitated but eventually wrote it down and handed it to her before heading for the door. Just as he was about to leave, she realized she hadn't asked his name. After a moment of thought, he smiled and told her she could call him Izuku. Later, Izuku felt a sense of relief after talking to Ochako as himself rather than Kage. He decided to find Mei, but first, he spotted Todoroki in an empty hallway. He approached him, tapping him on the shoulder, but Todoroki looked puzzled. Izuku felt a flutter of nerves, unsure if Todoroki recognized him. He introduced himself and asked if he could speak with him. The conversation was just beginning, and Izuku hoped it would lead to something meaningful. "Thank you for saving me a seat. Is it really okay for me to sit in the student section?" Mei smiled at him, her earlier sadness seemingly lifted. She gestured to the empty seat beside her, reassuring him. He was relieved and eager to watch the match. It promised to be exciting. With a sigh, Izuku settled into his seat and gazed out at the arena. Present Mike announced the competitors, and Izuku was not surprised to hear Bakugo and Todoroki's names. This match was bound to be captivating. As the fight progressed, Izuku felt a growing frustration. Had his encouragement made no difference? Then he noticed Todoroki's hesitation. Perhaps he just needed a little nudge. Taking a deep breath, Izuku shouted with all his might. "It's your power, not his." The crowd overlooked his words, but Todoroki heard him. So did Bakugo. The blonde paused mid-attack, scanning the audience for the source of that familiar voice. Could it really be him? The words held little significance for Bakugo, but they seemed to ignite something in Todoroki. In an instant, Todoroki's expression shifted, and the arena began to heat up. Bakugo watched in astonishment as flames erupted from Todoroki's left side, melting the ice he had previously shot. Then, Todoroki charged forward. From that point on, it was no longer a contest. The results were announced: Todoroki in first place, Bakugo in second, and Iida and Tokoyami in third. Iida seemed to have left, and Bakugo couldn't understand why. He felt he should be upset about coming in second. In any other situation, second place would have resulted in an explosive reaction. But Bakugo was too preoccupied with the voice that had called out to Todoroki. Could it have been Izuku? Was Deku really present? Regardless, the facts were clear. Todoroki had emerged victorious, and someone who sounded remarkably like Izuku Midoriya had played a part in that victory. The patrols with Eraserhead were enjoyable. Typically, Kage would handle the heavy lifting alone, but with Aizawa around, many confrontations ended swiftly. Although the hobo hero didn't appreciate the glitter bomb method of delivering criminals to the police station, one couldn't have everything. The night was unusually quiet, which made Kage uneasy. This part of Mustafu was rarely silent. There was always some chaos, no matter how small. It felt as if all the criminals had decided to take the night off, which was unsettling. As if the universe were responding to his thoughts, a distant explosion echoed, followed by smoke rising in the distance. Nothing could ever be simple. Before he could think, Kage sprinted toward the disturbance, leaping over alleys and skidding across rooftops. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 kept pace surprisingly well, despite not being familiar with the area. They reached the edge of a roof and stared in shock at the source of the smoke and noise. A 𝐼𝐻𝐬. This one was different from any Kage had encountered before. It was larger and appeared more menacing than any he had faced, including the one at the USJ. Suddenly, another explosion sounded, followed by more smoke rising from another part of the city. Then another and another. How many are there? Kage's voice trembled with fear, and he tried to steady himself. He couldn't falter now, too many lives were at stake. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 cursed quietly beside him. Then Kage recalled something from class a few days prior. The 1A students are doing their internships right now, right? You don't think? 𝐼𝐬𝐽 pointed below, where two figures were launching fire at the 𝐻𝐬𝐽. One was shorter, his dual-colored hair whipping across his face. Todoroki. Great. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 prepared his capture scarf, turning to Kage. He instructed Kage to assist wherever possible but to avoid getting hurt. He emphasized the importance of staying safe. Normally, Kage wouldn't take orders from anyone, but he nodded, a small smile on his face. He assured 𝐼𝐬𝐽 that he had no intention of dying anytime soon. With that, he dashed across the rooftops toward the nearest plume of smoke. However, something in an alley below caught his attention, causing him to freeze. A person in a hero costume leaned against the alley wall, bleeding. Another figure in strange armor stood frozen in fear and hatred. It was 𝐼𝐻𝐽. And in front of him. This society places too much faith in false heroes. I will end that misguided hope. A large, humanoid figure loomed over 𝐼𝐻𝐽, a sinister smile on his face. He wore a mask that obscured his eyes, and a sword was strapped to his back. In his hand, a small blade glimmered, dripping onto the ground. Kage made a quick decision. Pro-heroes would handle the 𝐻𝐬𝐽. This situation was more urgent. Kage leaped down from the roof, landing in a roll and rising in a crouch. He drew one of his 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 sticks from his back sheath, locking eyes with 𝐶𝐻𝐽, the villain who glared at him, clearly annoyed by the interruption. You really shouldn't monologue. It wastes air. The villain tightened his grip on the knife. My business is not with you, Kage. I am here to eliminate these false heroes. If you interfere, I will not hesitate to take you down as well. Kage laughed, though his nerves were on edge. Kage felt a surge of determination as he faced 𝐶𝐻𝐽, who was clearly irritated. 𝐶𝐻𝐽 charged at him, swinging his knife downward. Kage ducked just in time, jabbing his 𝐒𝐮𝐽 stick into 𝐶𝐻𝐽's side and activating it. Electricity coursed through 𝐶𝐻𝐽's body, causing him to lurch forward with a grunt. However, Kage quickly realized that 𝐶𝐻𝐽 was still very much aware and even angrier. 𝐶𝐻𝐽 drew a sword from his back and advanced on Kage. The Vigilante attempted to evade the incoming blade, but as the sword narrowly missed him, he felt a sharp sting in his thigh. Looking down, he saw a small knife embedded in his leg. Fantastic! 𝐶𝐻𝐽 approached with a fierce glare, but his expression shifted to shock as flames suddenly enveloped him. Kage turned to see a boy at the alley entrance, his left hand extended and eyes focused. Todoroki had come to his aid. Todoroki apologized for the delay, explaining that it was challenging to keep up from the ground. He mentioned that 𝐼𝐬𝐽 had sent him, anticipating that Kage might find himself in trouble. Pulling out his phone, he pressed a button before returning his attention to 𝐶𝐻𝐽, who was now on the ground, smoking and groaning. Yet, Kage watched as 𝐶𝐻𝐽 managed to rise again, sword still in hand. Todoroki warned 𝐶𝐻𝐽 against making any rash moves, informing him that pro-heroes were on their way and would not be pleased to find 3 injured individuals. 𝐶𝐻𝐽 attempted to charge forward, but something shot out from behind Todoroki, wrapping around his feet and causing him to fall. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 stepped into the alley, casting a stern look at Kage. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 expressed his concern, reminding Kage to be careful. Kage, with a knife still protruding from his leg, tried to appear indignant. He insisted he had done his best. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 sighed, looking weary. Kage's vision began to blur, but he noticed other pro-heroes arriving to take away a now furious 𝐶𝐻𝐽. He saw 𝐼𝐬𝐽 assist 𝐻𝐻𝐽 in standing before his legs gave way. He slid down the wall of the alley, feeling the effects of BLD loss. Why did this have to happen? Someone was calling his name, but Kage felt too distant to respond. He struggled to keep his eyes open, knowing he needed to rise. He didn't want to worry Aizawa. But then, darkness enveloped him, accompanied by haunting memories of his mother's screams and the sound of roaring flames. Summer break at UA had begun 2 days prior. For Izuku, this meant more hours at the cafe where he worked. He had been sleeping in his old apartment above the cafe, relieved that he wouldn't have to worry about a classmate walking in on him without his mask. As he worked, the bell above the cafe door chimed, and Izuku froze upon seeing who entered. 𝗟𝗏, 𝗏𝗍𝗍, ♯NSO, Mina, Kaminari, Todoroki, and Kirishima filled the cafe with their laughter. When Ochako spotted him, her face brightened with a surprised smile. Izuku greeted her warmly, trying to maintain his composure. Ochako approached the counter, asking if this was where he worked. He shrugged, glancing at his name tag, which read, Zuku. Behind her, someone cleared their throat, prompting a question about introductions. Ochako, slightly embarrassed, turned to her friends and introduced Izuku as her friend from the sports festival. He smiled as each of them introduced themselves, already familiar with their names. After they placed their orders, 𝗟𝗏 invited Izuku to join them at the mall for their class trip preparations. Despite his initial reluctance, the others insisted, and he eventually agreed, especially after Ochako assured him that a certain angry blonde wouldn't be present. She promised it would be fun and a chance to meet more of their classmates. Izuku held back the urge to mention that he already knew all of them and had even faced them in the past. He decided that revealing his identity as a vigilante might not be the best way to foster friendships. Izuku and Shigaraki sat on a bench beneath a small tree, away from the bustling mall. Izuku fought the urge to look around for a classmate or a pro hero who might come to his aid. He was acutely aware that Shigaraki had the power to end his life in an instant, yet he hesitated. Shigaraki wasted no time in expressing his disdain. He made it clear that he held no affection for Izuku. Despite the tension, Izuku couldn't help but chuckle, teasing Shigaraki about his bluntness. However, the villain's grip tightened around Izuku's neck, causing him to struggle for breath. Shigaraki revealed that Izuku's life was spared only because he still held value to his MSTR. The threat hung heavily in the air, and Izuku felt a chill run down his spine at the thought of his friends being harmed. He knew he had to protect them, or he would never forgive himself. Izuku challenged Shigaraki's reasoning, questioning the logic behind his public confrontation. Just as Shigaraki seemed ready to respond, a voice called out from behind them, interrupting the moment. With one last squeeze, Shigaraki stood up and walked away, leaving Izuku to rub his throat as he turned to see Yura and Tsu approaching, concern etched on their faces. Curiosity bubbled within him, prompting him to call after Shigaraki, demanding to know all for one's plans. The villain paused, smirking darkly before promising that Izuku would find out soon enough, then departed, leaving Izuku in a state of dismay. Later, while hanging out with his friends at a cafe, a question from Kirishima caught Izuku off guard. He froze, gripping his coffee cup tightly. Since the incident at the mall, he had been spending more time with his classmates, and the thought of them being his friends felt surreal. When asked why he hadn't applied to UA, Izuku struggled to find a response that wouldn't reveal his secret. Eventually, he admitted that he had wanted to try for the hero course but believed he wouldn't have been accepted. 𝗟𝗏, along with the others, looked at him with curiosity. The atmosphere grew tense as Izuku finally confessed that he was quirkless. The revelation left his friends in shock, but Kaminari quickly reassured him that their friendship wouldn't waver just because he lacked a quirk. Their enthusiastic support brought a genuine smile to Izuku's face, filling him with warmth and acceptance he had never experienced before. As the conversation shifted to their upcoming trip, Izuku listened quietly, savoring the normalcy of the moment. However, as the evening drew to a close, his friends departed, leaving him to tidy up the cafe. At 5 o'clock, he locked up and headed upstairs to his apartment, Shigaraki's ominous words echoing in his mind. Determined to take action, he donned a hoodie and a mask before stepping out to visit some old friends. Later that night, Izuku found himself at a bar where 𝗏𝗏, 𝗏𝗏, and Jack were gathered. 𝗏𝗏 slumped over the counter, while 𝗏𝗏 enjoyed a drink beside him. Jack, stationed behind the bar, acknowledged Izuku with a nod. 𝗏𝗏 greeted him with a playful invitation to join them for a drink, suggesting it could be his last chance. Izuku declined, citing his upcoming patrol and the longing to avoid any accidents. 𝗏𝗏 laughed, setting his empty mug down with a thud. Concerned for 𝗏𝗏, Izuku inquired about his friend's mood. Jack hesitated before explaining that 𝗏𝗏 had been troubled all day, likely worried about events at their hideout. Curiosity piqued, Izuku pressed for details, requesting clarity rather than vague hints. Jack frowned but complied, handing Izuku a cup of coffee, which he accepted gratefully. He would need the caffeine to stay awake through the night for patrol. The situation was dire, they had no idea what was happening, and no one was willing to share any information. Trust was in short supply, and it felt like only a matter of time before they faced a serious threat. From beneath his arms, 𝗏𝗏 let out a groan. 𝗏𝗏 nodded along, but Izuku could tell he was not fully engaged in their conversation. The three individuals before him were vastly different from their other counterparts, which was expected when one's mind and personality were divided among three people. 𝗏𝗏 possessed a unique quirk that allowed him to create and animate skeletons, imbuing them with fragments of his consciousness. Some time ago, he had decided to create semi-permanent skeletons to share his mind with. This arrangement meant that the three could communicate telepathically, but it also meant that many of 𝗏𝗏's more frustrating traits had been concentrated into one individual. 𝗏𝗏, despite his good intentions, often made it difficult to accomplish anything useful. It was unfortunate that they could not provide any information, as Jack expressed his disappointment. All they knew was that something significant was being planned, and it was wise to remain vigilant. Izuku nodded, rising from his chair and heading toward the door. Without the trio's insights, he faced a challenge, but all he could do was observe and wait. The safety of his new friends might depend on his alertness. Thus, Izuku would require a substantial amount of coffee. As the day progressed, Kage scanned the crowd of UA students, feeling a sense of urgency. Class 1B was not traveling with Class 1A on the bus, which meant fewer distractions for him. He spotted a small group of friends and smiled beneath his mask. It felt strange not being able to approach them after spending weeks together, but he was determined to maintain his cover. 𝐼𝐬𝐻 appeared beside Kage, his expression disapproving as he regarded the noisy group of students. Kage glanced up at him, stifling a laugh, which only drew 𝐼𝐬𝐻's glare. If Kage continued this way throughout the trip, 𝐼𝐬𝐻 threatened to leave him behind. Kage found this amusing, confident that he could easily follow the teacher. After all, 𝐼𝐬𝐻 would need his assistance with the rowdy group. 𝐼𝐬𝐻 sighed and leaned against the side of the bus as students began to board. Just because Kage was right didn't mean 𝐼𝐬𝐻 had to enjoy it. Kage let out a genuine laugh, prompting 𝐼𝐬𝐻 to look at him with curiosity. Kage waved him off and followed the class onto the bus. As they traveled, Kage overheard voices from the back of the bus speculating about their destination. The gentle rocking of the vehicle and the warmth of the summer sun threatened to lull him to sleep, but he resisted, unwilling to risk slipping into dreams where he might scream. Suddenly, the bus came to a jarring halt. Stepping outside, Kage found himself at the edge of a cliff overlooking a forest. 𝐼𝐬𝐻 exited last and called for everyone's attention, which was when Kage noticed the other heroes. 𝐼𝐬𝐻 commanded silence, explaining that the Pussycats would assist with their training camp and that they should treat them with the same respect they would show him. He would know if they did not. Kaminari raised his hand, prompting 𝐼𝐬𝐻 to acknowledge him. He asked where they were, noting that they were supposed to be at a training camp. Before 𝐼𝐬𝐻 could respond, one of the Pussycats stepped forward with a playful smile, revealing that the camp was just through the forest and that they had decided to turn the journey into an exercise. Some students groaned while others expressed excitement. Kage remained neutral, wishing he could participate in the exercise he had heard 𝐼𝐬𝐻 discuss on the phone. It sounded enjoyable. With a shout of "Ready, go!" the Pussycats sprang into action. Kage realized he had been distracted just as Pixie Bob activated her quirk, sending a wave of earth cascading down the cliff, accompanied by the students' surprised shouts. Kage chuckled as Mandalay approached him with a smile. She inquired if he was Izawa's asset, to which Kage raised an eyebrow and smirked beneath his mask. He playfully acknowledged her compliment, while Izawa groaned, half-heartedly defending himself. Later, as both Class 1A and Class 1B enjoyed dinner, Kage noticed Mandalay scanning the area, seemingly searching for someone. He approached her and asked what she had lost. She sighed, revealing that she was looking for her nephew, 𝐻𝐻𝐬, who had not received any dinner. Kage took the plate of food from her, assuring her he would find 𝐻𝐻𝐬. Mandalay thanked him with a tired smile before heading off to join the other pussycats. Kage made his way into the woods, the steaming plate in his hands. He had seen a small boy sneak away and was determined to locate him. After wandering for some time, Kage finally discovered a cave where 𝐻𝐻𝐬 sat outside. It had taken him so long to find the boy that the food had gone cold. Kage sighed, setting the plate down before turning to leave. Kage sensed that 𝐻𝐻𝐬 preferred solitude at the moment, so he decided to give him space. The small, downcast voice of the black-haired boy caught his attention. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 was attempting to conceal his curiosity, but Kage could see through it. He approached and crouched beside the child. Kage explained that he wasn't a hero but a vigilante, introducing himself as Kage. The boy's eyes widened in surprise. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 expressed his admiration, noting that Kage saved people simply because it was the right thing to do, not for money or fame. Kage felt a mix of surprise and happiness at this revelation. He had never considered that he might have fans. The thought was both strange and comforting. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 then asked why Kage chose to be a vigilante instead of pursuing fame. Kage paused but decided to be honest. He shared that his dream had always been to be a hero, but he was quirkless. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 frowned, contemplating this for a moment before insisting that Kage could still pursue his dream. He believed that Kage could be the first quirkless hero. When Kage remained silent, a hint of worry crossed 𝐻𝐻𝐬's face as he questioned whether Kage had given up on his aspirations. Kage smiled warmly at him and stood to leave, recalling Tsukachi's words. He reassured 𝐻𝐻𝐬 that he hadn't given up yet. Pixie Bob's cheerful voice filled the air, hinting at something exciting yet potentially dangerous planned for the day. After spending time with the pussycats, Kage had learned that Pixie Bob only got excited about activities involving risk. When no one responded to her, she continued, announcing that they had devised a fun game for the last day of training. She promised more details after their session, encouraging everyone to look forward to the friendly competition. As the students resumed their daily routine of training, meals, and more training, Kage noticed that 𝐻𝐻𝐬 had been absent from the meals. After a particularly challenging event involving baths and a high wall, he had inquired about 𝐻𝐻𝐬's parents. Mandalay revealed the heartbreaking truth. 𝐻𝐻𝐬's parents had been heroes who were killed by a villain years ago, leaving 𝐻𝐻𝐬 with a deep-seated resentment toward heroes and a reluctance to be around them. Kage felt a growing concern for the boy. He had a vague idea of who 𝐻𝐻𝐬's parents were, but he didn't want to push the child to relive painful memories. Still, he wanted to ensure 𝐻𝐻𝐬 was eating, which led him to carry a plate of food to 𝐻𝐻𝐬's secret hideout during lunch. He set the plate down beside the boy, who remained unresponsive. Kage urged 𝐻𝐻𝐬 to eat, but the boy said nothing. With a sigh, Kage turned away and headed back to the camp, preparing for a long afternoon of overseeing training and the upcoming game. As night fell, Pixie Bob announced the details of their game, explaining that the classes would take turns trying to scare each other. The first group would hide along a designated path while the other group walked through it. If they made it to the other side without being scared, they would win. Some students groaned while others appeared anxious. Kage felt his earlier worries ease. This activity didn't seem too dangerous. With the students dispersing to find hiding spots, Kage observed the pairings. He noted Tsu and Yura, who were practically inseparable, and the intriguing duo of Todoroki and Bakugo. He was curious to see how they would handle the challenge. As the first pairs began their walk through the path, Kage caught a whiff of something unusual in the air: smoke. He glanced toward the trees and noticed dark clouds rising from the forest. Turning to the pussycats, who had also noticed, he received instructions to ensure all the kids made it through while they protected those on the other side. Kage nodded and sprinted into the trees. As he ventured deeper into the forest, he spotted a hazy gas hovering near the ground. Then he saw the students, some from both classes lying on the ground, struggling to breathe while others were completely still. Kage's heart raced in horror, he couldn't carry them all. Just then, two figures emerged from the trees, Shoji and Sato, both wearing gas masks. They rushed over to Kage, quickly assessing the situation. Shoji asked how many Kage could carry, and he immediately began to help, slinging two of the students over his back while Sato picked up the other two. They turned and hurried back toward the other students, with Kage trailing behind, scanning the area for any remaining classmates. Finding none, he concluded that most had either made it through or secured gas masks. Upon reaching the clearing where the others were gathered, Kage froze. Two villains stood before him. One resembled a lizard more than a human, wielding a massive sword composed of smaller blades. The other was enormous, holding a long piece of cement above Pixie Bob. The rest of the pussycats formed a protective barrier in front of the students, striving to shield them while attempting to rescue their friend. Kage quickly surveyed the group, noting that one person was conspicuously absent. He felt a surge of determination. As he called out to 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿, declaring that he knew where 𝐾𝐻𝐬 was and that he would ensure the boy's safety. 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 acknowledged him with a nod before refocusing on the villains. Kage took off, running faster than he ever had before. A sense of urgency gripped him, compelling him to reach 𝐾𝐻𝐬. Rounding the corner to the cave, he was met with the sight of an enormous man standing over 𝐾𝐻𝐬, who lay on the ground with sheer terror etched on his face. As the villain swung a fist toward 𝐾𝐻𝐬, Kage leaped into action, snatching the boy into his arms and narrowly evading the man's reach. The villain paused, momentarily confused by the absence of a child beneath his hand, before his gaze settled on Kage. His sneer transformed into a scowl as he stepped forward, recognizing Kage as the one Shigaraki had mentioned. Kage felt a tremor of fear but masked it with sarcasm, hoping his voice wouldn't betray him. The large man dismissed Kage's words, stating that he was merely in the way and had been about to enjoy some fun with 𝐾𝐻𝐬. He taunted Kage about the significance of killing someone's parents, emphasizing the thrill of rubbing it in their face afterward. 𝐾𝐻𝐬 stiffened in Kage's arms, and Kage glanced down to see recognition and horror on the boy's face. 𝐾𝐻𝐬 quietly acknowledged the villain, prompting a laugh from the man, who then removed his mask to reveal a scarred face and a metal eye. He spread his arms wide, relishing the recognition from his fan. Kage slowly backed away, contemplating a leap from the cliff to escape, even if it meant risking his own safety to protect 𝐾𝐻𝐬. Before he could finalize his plan, the villain lunged forward, swinging his arm for another strike. Kage dodged to the side, managing to push 𝐾𝐻𝐬 out of harm's way. He felt a heavy impact against his side, followed by a loud crunch, sending him flying through the air and crashing onto the rocky ground. Groaning, Kage lifted his head to see the villain approaching with a menacing grin. The man relished the moment, but Kage was determined to turn the tide. As the villain prepared to strike again, Kage rolled aside and sprang to one knee, retrieving an 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 stick from behind him. He raised it defensively just in time to absorb the next blow. Kage gritted his teeth as the force of the attack pushed him backward, away from the cliff and 𝐾𝐻𝐬. When the villain pulled back for another strike, Kage surged forward, jabbing the 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 stick into the man's gut and activating the shock function. The villain stumbled back with a cry, but not before landing one last hit that sent Kage crashing against the cliff wall with a resounding crack, leaving him gasping in pain. Despite the agony, Kage realized he had succeeded in incapacitating the villain. He slid to the ground, blood trickling down from his hairline as his vision blurred. He fought against the encroaching darkness, knowing there were others who needed his help. Just as he felt himself slipping away, a voice echoed in his mind, snapping him back to reality. It was a woman's voice, urgently announcing that the target of the attack was Bakugo Katsuki and instructing him to come to their aid for protection. With renewed determination, Kage opened his eyes wide and attempted to sit up, only to cry out as his cracked ribs protested. A small figure appeared before him, looking down with concern. 𝐾𝐻𝐬 offered to help, and Kage leaned back, instructing him to retrieve a small bottle from his pocket. 𝐾𝐻𝐬 complied, trembling slightly as he handed it to Kage. Grimacing, Kage reached up with his uninjured arm, slowly removing his damaged mask. The mask had been damaged from the villain's last punch, and Kage would need to ask Mei to repair it later. Koda's eyes widened as Kage's mask and goggles slipped off, revealing the face of a teenager. He had probably expected an adult, but the boy in front of him, now drinking a mysterious liquid, looked no older than the kids in Class 1A. As the liquid flowed down Kage's throat, it warmed him from within. It was a special mixture he had received from Recovery Girl, designed to aid in rapid healing. The elderly woman had insisted he take some with him, claiming he was always getting himself into trouble, whatever that meant. Shakily, Kage stood up, using a hand against the cliff wall for support. He took a moment to assess his healing progress, nodding as he turned back to Koda. He felt well enough to give the kid a piggyback ride out of there. He encouraged Koda to hop on, stating they had a Bakugo to find. Suddenly, Kage lost his balance and fell, groaning as he rolled over to check if Koda had landed safely. The kid was already on his feet, looking down at the Vigilante with concern. With a grunt, Kage pushed himself up, feeling the pain in his side. It was clear he wasn't fully healed. A sudden noise pulled Kage from his thoughts. He turned just in time to catch the capture scarf that flew toward him, wincing as he released his grip. That had been his injured arm. Figures emerged from the trees, about 6 in total. Most appeared to be kids, but one was tall, with hair floating around his head and eyes ablaze. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽. When the hero recognized Kage, he relaxed slightly, allowing his hair to settle. He stepped forward, trying to assess the situation. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 asked what had happened and where Kage had gone. Kage steadied his breathing, ensuring no pain seeped into his voice as he replied that he had a kid to save. He nudged Koda forward, who had been hiding behind him. The boy looked uncertain about the teacher, but after a nod from Kage, he stepped closer. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 offered to take Koda back to 𝐒𝐮𝐷𝐿 and suggested Kage return to camp, noting he looked terrible. Kage, not meaning to sound harsh, insisted he needed to find Bakugo. 𝐼𝐻𝐬's expression shifted from confusion to understanding, recognizing Kage's connection to his student. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 agreed but warned Kage to be careful and asked how injured he was. Kage downplayed his injuries, stating he was not badly hurt. When pressed further, he admitted to 4 cracked ribs, a sprained wrist, and possibly a broken arm, dismissing it as normal. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 seemed ready to argue but held back. He asked Kage to at least 𝐒𝐮𝐷𝐷 the kids to camp while searching for his friend. Kage nodded and turned to the 5 students as 𝐼𝐻𝐬 picked Koda up. He recognized 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐿, Tsu, Kirishima, Mina, and Kaminari, his friends. He pulled his hood low over his eyes, hoping the darkness would help conceal his identity. Fortunately, the students did not seem to recognize him. Kage instructed them to stay close as they moved quickly through the forest, searching for any sign of trouble. Suddenly, an explosion echoed through the night, and a cold breeze swept through Kage's hair, prompting him to grip the edge of his hood. He took off running, hearing the students' breaths behind him as they struggled to keep up. The group rounded a corner and came face to face with Todoroki and a villain. The ground was covered in ice, and Kage tread carefully as he approached Todoroki. He asked what had happened, and Todoroki, snapping out of his daze, pointed to the villain, who held up 2 marbles. The masked figure grinned, claiming it was a magic trick from his days as a performer. Without warning, the villain threw something in front of him, releasing a cloud of smoke. Kage and Todoroki tried to wave it away and rushed forward, but when they reached the spot where the villain had been, he had vanished. Frustrated, Kage exclaimed what they should do next. Todoroki scanned the tree line and pointed toward a tall tree. Kage spotted a familiar figure running through the treetops, a top hat perched on his head. He turned to the other students, urging them to follow. They managed to corner Mr. Compress in a clearing not far from where they had encountered the villain. However, he was not alone. Toga and Dabi stood with him, and their expressions suggested they were not pleased to see the students. When Toga's gaze landed on Kage, she smiled widely, brandishing a knife that glistened ominously. Kage noticed Ochako and Tsu's eyes widened slightly, as if they recognized him. Why was this happening? Oh no. They had been at the mall and had heard Shigaraki refer to him as Zuzu. Perhaps they would dismiss it as a coincidence. He hoped they would think it was just that. Kage's voice was sharper than usual, prompting Toga to smile even wider. She teased him, saying that he could see his friend if he wanted. Suddenly, a popping sound came from Mr. Compress's hand, and 𝐾𝐿 appeared, coughing on marble dust. Before anyone could react, 𝐼𝐵 swiftly grabbed the back of 𝐾𝐿's neck, issuing a clear warning that any attempt to intervene would result in dire consequences. Kage took a small step forward, his resolve hardening. He demanded that 𝐼𝐵 let 𝐾𝐿 go, but 𝐼𝐵 merely smirked, tightening his grip. He taunted Kage, reminding him of his perceived weaknesses. Kage felt a surge of anger at the word quirkless. It was a term that stung, a reminder of a powerlessness that felt inescapable. Determined, Kage reached behind him and pulled out one of his 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭. His hands trembled, not from fear but from anger. Before Todoroki could caution him, Kage lunged forward, aiming his 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃 stick at 𝐼𝐵's head. However, his strike was met with resistance, as Toga stepped in his way, her sharp-toothed smile only adding to the tension. Chaos erupted as the other students joined the fray, battling the villains while Kage fought to reach 𝐾𝐿. Just when he thought things couldn't get worse, a purple portal opened behind 𝐼𝐵, who began to retreat, dragging a struggling 𝐾𝐿 with him. Kage acted on instinct, racing through the turmoil, desperate to reach 𝐾𝐿. His hood flew off, but he paid it no mind. He had to reach his friend. The portal was closing. Kage cried out, extending his hand as far as he could. No, no. He called out for 𝐾𝐿, and in that moment, recognition flashed in the blonde's eyes. Just before the portal sealed shut, their fingers brushed against each other. Then he was gone. Kage fell to his knees, staring blankly at the ground. His face felt wet, and he absently wiped the moisture from his cheek, confused to find it stained with a pink liquid. Was he crying? A rustle to his left drew his attention. He noticed the other students watching him with concern. They must have recognized him now, but he felt too lost to care. Aizawa rushed over, crouching beside him and placing a hand on his shoulder, asking what had happened. Kage managed to speak through the dryness in his throat, telling Aizawa that 𝐾𝐿 was gone. Izuku had been in the hospital for 2 days, and only Aizawa had come to visit him during that time. He hadn't spoken a word since that night, until his friends arrived. As the door creaked open, he saw Ochako, Tsu, Todoroki, Ida, Mina, Kaminari, and Kirishima enter, followed by the rest of Class 1A, all whispering among themselves. Izuku couldn't meet their eyes, fearing they might hate him for lying to them for so long. Suddenly, arms wrapped around him, and he froze. It was Ochako, her forehead resting on his shoulder, trembling with silent tears. He held her at arm's length, confused by the tear streaks on her face. She expressed how worried they had been and how they thought the worst might have happened. Izuku's voice came out as a hoarse whisper as he questioned why they weren't angry with him. He felt guilt weighing him down, an emptiness that threatened to consume him. When he looked up, he was taken aback by the sadness in his friends' expressions. They weren't angry, they were just sad. Kirishima spoke gently, assuring Izuku that they could never be mad at him. They understood why he had kept his secret. They were just relieved he was alive. The room fell into a comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Kaminari snapped his fingers, realizing that Izuku was the same person 𝐾𝐿 had mentioned, the quirkless friend who had left. Kirishima seemed struck by the revelation, and he groaned in realization. Ochako spoke slowly, as if comforting a frightened animal, asking if Izuku remembered what had happened. His stomach dropped as he admitted that he couldn't save 𝐾𝐿. Kirishima looked disappointed, expressing hope that Izuku might have a plan to find 𝐾𝐿. Suddenly, an idea sparked in Izuku's mind, an idea that was risky but might just work. He smiled for the first time in days, ready to share his thoughts with his friends. Izuku contemplated the situation, leaning back in his chair as he frowned at Jack. After much discussion, he had successfully persuaded Aizawa to allow Jack, Suk, and Thresh onto the UA campus. Now, they were gathered in the support course classroom, with Kirishima, Ida, and Todoroki standing awkwardly to the side. Mei sat beside Izuku, tinkering with a new prototype mask. She had scolded him for about an hour after he mentioned his damaged mask, but eventually agreed to fix it in exchange for attending this meeting. 𝐮 sighed, rubbing his face in frustration. He appeared exhausted, as if he hadn't slept in days. Izuku expressed his determination, stating that he was always serious about their plans. Jack, visibly annoyed, questioned why their missions always seemed to involve danger. Izuku acknowledged the risks, admitting that he wouldn't seek their help if he could handle it alone. He felt a wave of worry wash over him, which he despised, but he knew he needed their support this time. Jack dropped his head onto the table, a silent acceptance of the situation. Izuku recognized that Jack would never openly agree to the plan, but this was as close as he would get. He clapped his hands together and turned to his friends, asking if they were ready to follow through with their part. If everything went according to plan, they wouldn't need to do much, but given his track record, he knew that plans often went awry. Iida, Todoroki, and Kirishima nodded, each displaying varying degrees of determination. Izuku then turned to Mei, who had finished with the mask and was now working on an 𝐼𝐮𝐲 stick. He asked if she could complete it by that evening, as he might need it for their mission. Mei smiled, boosting Izuku's spirits. As he stood to leave, he addressed the group of allies, instructing them to meet at the front gates at 11 and to be prepared for anything. They were determined to succeed, as failure was not an option. The group traveled by subway, heading towards 𝐾𝐮𝐲. Jack had sent Izuku the location, and they rode in silence, each lost in their thoughts. Mei arrived just in time with all the necessary gear, but Izuku felt a sense of unease. The thought of something going wrong, or one of the students getting hurt, weighed heavily on him. He steeled himself, vowing to do whatever it took to protect his friends, even if it meant sacrificing himself. As the subway came to a halt and the doors opened, the four of them, Izuku, Iida, Todoroki, and Kirishima, exited quickly, making their way up the stairs into the bustling city district. The bright lights and noise overwhelmed Izuku, and he felt a headache coming on. Iida walked beside him, repeating his mantra about keeping Izuku out of trouble, which seemed more like a reassurance to himself than anyone else. Turning a corner, they spotted an abandoned bar, oddly situated amidst the vibrant surroundings of 𝐾𝐮𝐲. Izuku motioned for the others to follow as he crept toward the side of the building. Once behind a low wall, he crouched down and sent a quick message to Jack, knowing that the next part would be challenging. For now, all he could do was wait. Meanwhile, 𝐒𝐵𝐸 sat in an abandoned bar, feeling trapped and frustrated. He had been left alone with his thoughts, which swirled with emotions he preferred to ignore. Guilt, sadness, and worry consumed him, and he felt as if he might drown in them. Just then, the door creaked open, drawing his attention. A newcomer entered, a man with dark brown hair and warm green eyes. 𝐒𝐵𝐸 narrowed his gaze, unsure of the stranger's intentions. The man quickly shushed him and moved closer, expertly removing 𝐒𝐵𝐸's restraints in mere seconds. He gestured toward the door, indicating that they needed to leave. 𝐒𝐵𝐸 stood cautiously, sensing that the man meant him no harm. Confusion filled his mind. Was this man a villain? Yet, when their eyes met, 𝐒𝐵𝐸 saw only concern and fatigue. The stranger placed a hand on 𝐒𝐵𝐸's shoulder, guiding him toward the exit, where another figure leaned against the wall, watching them intently. His skin appeared almost translucent, occasionally allowing 𝐒𝐵𝐸 to glimpse his bones. Instead of raising an alarm, the man in the hallway waved them away, following closely behind. 𝐒𝐵𝐸 felt an odd sensation, as if he were being guided by security personnel, with the brunette leading the way and the dark-haired man bringing up the rear. They reached another door without incident, and the brown-haired man pushed it open, revealing a dark night sky and Izuku standing outside, a hood pulled over his hair and a mask covering his face. His eyes shone a bright green and seemed to widen slightly upon seeing 𝐒𝐵𝐸. Once all three were outside, Izuku stepped forward and removed his mask. His gaze passed over the blonde and settled on the brunette instead. He urged them to come along, explaining that it was no longer safe for them, and if anyone discovered who had helped him escape, it would be disastrous. The brown-haired man shook his head, watching Izuku with a hint of sadness, insisting that they couldn't abandon their post as long as they could still be of assistance. Izuku's expression was conflicted as he pleaded with 𝐮, expressing his fear of losing them. When 𝐮 remained silent, Izuku turned to the black-haired man, Jack, his green eyes filled with desperation, asking him to convince 𝐮𝐿 that staying was foolish. Jack nodded, frowning in 𝐮𝐿's direction, acknowledging the danger but stating he couldn't leave the others behind. He mentioned that 𝗟𝗃 shared 𝐮𝐿's view, gesturing toward him and muttering about a lack of self-preservation. Izuku sighed and stepped back, making a promise that if they ever needed his help, they should reach out, and he warned them not to put themselves in harm's way. Jack scoffed but nodded in agreement before turning to reopen the door, only to find someone on the other side already turning the handle. The group froze as the door swung open, revealing Toga and 𝐼𝐷𝐵, the tall fire user. 𝐼𝐷𝐵 frowned at the four of them, his hands igniting with blue flames, playfully commenting on their early departure. Toga stepped forward, a knife glinting at her side, teasing Izuku about forgetting something important. He instinctively reached for his mask, realizing he had overlooked it, though it hardly mattered since everyone around him already knew his identity. He confidently told Toga that they should leave while they still had the chance. Toga grinned mischievously and advanced, but before she or 𝐼𝐷𝐵 could take another step, a loud boom erupted from the building behind them. The villains paused, their eyes widening at the sound. Izuku froze when a voice echoed in the air, muffled yet unmistakable. It was a declaration that sent a chill down his spine. 𝐼𝐷𝐵 groaned, and Toga visibly deflated. Izuku mentally scolded himself for forgetting to inform the heroes about his plan. He wondered how many had come and what they would think upon realizing 𝐼𝐵𝐻𝐽 was missing. He tugged on 𝐵𝐻𝐽's shoulder, nodding toward the area where their classmates were hiding. But before 𝐵𝐻𝐽 could move, the ground trembled beneath them. Izuku turned to see the source of the disturbance, and the building where the League of Villains had been hiding shook violently. Suddenly, the wall exploded outward. Izuku was thrown back along with the others standing outside. He landed on the ground and rolled to his knees, coughing up dust. As he blinked through the smoke, he spotted a figure emerging from the wreckage. The figure was tall and appeared human, but his head was unusual. Even without clear features, Izuku instinctively recognized him. All for one. As Izuku stood, another large figure landed amidst the debris. The green-haired boy immediately identified him before he even spoke. "I am here. Again." A groan escaped from beside Izuku, and he turned to see 𝐵𝐻𝐽 pushing himself up onto his forearms a few feet away. Slowly, Izuku rose to his feet, casting a wary glance at the two men. He addressed 𝐵𝐻𝐽 in a low, commanding voice, instructing him to run and find their classmates behind the wall. 𝐵𝐻𝐽, unsteady but resolute, refused to leave without him. Izuku tried to argue, but 𝐵𝐻𝐽 insisted they would leave together. Izuku let out a shaky laugh, scanning the rubble for any sign of 𝐮𝐿 and Jack. He spotted them a short distance away, watching the unfolding confrontation. Then, the other villains appeared, surrounding 𝐵𝐻𝐽 and Izuku in mere moments. Toga, 𝐼𝐷𝐵, Spinner, and Twice closed in, leaving Izuku searching for an escape route, but he found none. It seemed it was time for Plan B. Slowly, Izuku reached into his pocket and pulled out a small handgun. Before any of the villains could react, he launched a flare high into the sky. Almost immediately, a slope of ice appeared to Izuku's right, and three figures soared over the debris of the building. Ida, Todoroki, and Kirishima flew through the air. Kirishima's voice echoed through the night, loud enough to be heard above the chaos. 𝐵𝐻𝐽 glanced up and then turned to Izuku. The green-haired boy noticed the conflicted expression in 𝐵𝐻𝐽's red eyes. He wanted to leave, but not without Izuku. Izuku smiled confidently and nodded at him. He urged 𝐵𝐻𝐽 to go, assuring him that he would be fine and that they would meet again. 𝐵𝐻𝐽 hesitated for a moment before nodding. He shot into the air, joining the other three mid-flight. Once Izuku was certain the students were safely away, he called out to Jack and 𝐮𝐿. Jack looked over, quickly understanding Izuku's intent from his expression. He nodded and turned to speak with 𝐮𝐿. As the villains began to advance toward Izuku, the ground beneath him trembled. 6 skeletal figures emerged from the earth, forming a protective circle around him. They engaged the villains, allowing Izuku to find his chance to escape. He dashed toward Jack and 𝐮𝐿, who were both focused and deep in concentration. Jack sensed Izuku's presence, and his focus wavered as he glanced down. It was time to move. Izuku nodded and sprinted in the direction where the students had landed. Just as they cleared the rubble and turned into a side alley, a massive explosion erupted behind them, sending them sprawling to the ground. Izuku crashed into a wall, groaning as he struggled to his feet. He noticed 𝗏𝗏 had caught up with them, helping Suk stand as Jack brushed himself off. Izuku turned to see a crowd gathered around a large television screen. As he stepped out of the alley, he realized they were back on a busy main street, where people stood frozen, captivated by whatever was playing on the screen. Navigating through the crowd, he stopped next to Kirishima, Ida, Todoroki, and Bakugo. They looked disheveled yet exhilarated, worry and fear evident in their eyes. They urged him to look at the screen. Izuku glanced up and gasped in disbelief. All Might, what had once been All Might, stood over the fallen form of 𝐿, one arm raised high. His body appeared skeletal, and his smile was absent. He had triumphed, but at an unimaginable cost. Mirio reached forward and switched off the television, unable to watch any longer. Tamaki approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder, concerned for his friend. Mirio stood silently, avoiding Tamaki's gaze. He turned and headed for the door, feeling the need to escape, to take action. He reassured Tamaki that he was fine, but he had a lot of training to do. Kage had not returned to UA since the Kamino Ward incident. He wasn't entirely sure why he was avoiding it. Perhaps it was because he didn't want to face his friends in Class 1A or confront Bakugo. Regardless of the reason, it had been 2 weeks since he last visited. It was clear that Mei felt differently. She insisted he couldn't avoid them forever, as they missed him and were worried about his absence. Izuku sighed, removing his mask and sitting on Mei's bedroom floor. He had known that visiting her would lead to her encouraging him to return, but he craved human interaction. Although he interacted with people at the cafe, it wasn't the same as spending time with a friend. He had been cautious at work, avoiding encounters with Aizawa, Ochako, or any other friends by retreating to the back and having Yui cover for him while he prepared food. Mei looked at him sadly as he expressed his reluctance to return. He hated seeing her concern, as it reminded him of their bond, even if they weren't related by blood. He urged her to stop looking at him that way, insisting he was fine. Izuku stood up, pulled his hood over his head, and put his mask back on. He had to leave, promising to see her later. Before Mei could say anything else, Kage jumped out of her bedroom window and swung onto the roof, determined to investigate a particular group that had caught his attention. The 𝐶𝐻𝐼 was one of the prominent Yakuza groups in Japan's underground. Kage had begun looking into them a few days after the Kamino incident, following an encounter with a man possessing a crystal quirk. He found something unsettling about the 𝐶𝐻𝐼. They were known for drug trafficking, but recently, their activities seemed different. He couldn't pinpoint the issue, but he was determined to uncover the truth. After some research, Kage identified the area where the 𝐶𝐻𝐼 had been most active in recent weeks. He made his way there, moving silently across rooftops, keeping one eye on his path and the other on the streets below. Movement in an alley across the street caught Kage's attention, prompting him to stop and swiftly leap down onto the street without making a sound. He cautiously approached the alley, observing the figures lurking in the shadows. A quick glance up and down the street revealed an unusual absence of people or cars, which felt strange yet not entirely unexpected. However, when he looked back into the alley, the figures had vanished. Something shifted beside him, and as he turned to investigate, a fist struck him in the gut. Kage was propelled backward, crashing against the stone wall and sliding to the ground, gasping for breath. He attempted to rise unsteadily, but a hand seized his hood and yanked him into the alley. Kage fought back, reaching for one of his 𝐒𝐮𝐬 sticks, but the man dragging him threw him against the alley wall. A voice echoed through the alley, causing Kage to flinch. A man emerged from the shadows, his face obscured by a large bird mask. Kage recognized him by reputation alone. He reached up to rub his head while discreetly pressing a small button on his mask that covered his ear. A ringing filled his ears, reminiscent of waiting for someone to answer a call. This was a new feature of his mask, programmed with only one phone number. On the other end, Tsukachi's voice came through, initially puzzled. Kage informed him about overhaul, and Tsukachi's voice fell silent, replaced by distant chaos. Shouts and hurried footsteps echoed, but the voices were too far for Kage to comprehend. When Tsukachi spoke again, his tone was urgent, warning Kage to stay put and not hang up. Kage felt a slight relief. If the police were tracking the call, they might also be recording the conversation. If he were to meet a dire fate, at least it wouldn't be in vain. Overhaul continued speaking, expressing his annoyance at Kage's interference with his Yakuza operations. Kage forced a laugh, remarking that he wasn't involved in illegal activities. A punch landed in his gut, and Kage clenched his teeth, refusing to give Overhaul the satisfaction of hearing him react. In the distance, police sirens wailed, catching Overhaul's attention. He demanded to know what Kage had done. Kage was lifted off the ground and slammed against the wall, but despite the pain he managed to laugh, feigning innocence. Suddenly, a wave of pain surged through him, and he gasped as he was released, collapsing to the ground and clutching his stomach. It felt as if his insides were being torn apart. Looking up through blurred vision, he saw Overhaul standing over him, disgust evident even through the mask. Then, as if by magic, Kage felt a strange sensation, as if his body was healing. He lay on the ground, gasping for air, hearing the footsteps of Overhaul's associates retreating. Had that been a result of Overhaul's quirk? Tsukachi's voice broke through again, asking if Kage was okay. Kage leaned against the alley wall, still struggling to catch his breath, and managed to respond that he was fine, just having underestimated Overhaul. Then he lost consciousness. After the encounter with Overhaul, Tsukachi convinced Kage to return to UA, leading to a chaotic reunion with his friends. They expressed their worry about his sudden disappearance, each one speaking over the other. Kage turned to see Kaken standing by his desk, who had remained calm amidst the commotion, a typical move for him. Kage removed his mask, feeling it unnecessary around his classmates. He smiled at Kaken, who did not return the gesture, before sitting down at his desk. Aizawa acknowledged him with a nod before addressing the class. He commanded silence, announcing that they would have guests from the third-year class, top students from the school, and he expected everyone to treat them with respect. Mina raised her hand, and after a sigh, Aizawa reluctantly called on her. She asked why the guests were coming, to which Aizawa replied curtly that they would explain themselves. The door opened, and Izuku quickly put his mask back on, ready for whatever was to come. Just because he felt at ease around the 1A students didn't mean he wanted his identity revealed to some upperclassmen, no matter how accomplished they were. Kage observed as 3 individuals entered the room. They appeared to be friends, yet they couldn't be more different from one another. The first student was tall, blonde, and radiated a sunny disposition, reminiscent of a miniature All Might to Kage. The second was a girl with long, light blue hair and a cheerful smile. The third slouched slightly, his navy blue hair falling into his face, and his expression suggested he would prefer to be anywhere else. The blonde began to introduce himself. He announced his name as Mirio and introduced his friends, Nijire and Tamaki. The girl waved enthusiastically, while the boy kept his gaze fixed on the floor. Mirio continued to speak about internships, but Kage lost interest. The rest of the class, however, seemed captivated. During Kage's absence, they had all received their provisional hero licenses, a privilege usually reserved for second-year students. Aizawa interrupted Mirio, asking if he would like to demonstrate his abilities for the class. Mirio agreed with a bright smile, suggesting they move outside. Aizawa nodded and signaled for the class to head out. Kage followed, intrigued by Aizawa's intentions. The Vigilante trailed behind the class, with the third years leading the way to the PE training area. Upon arrival, Tamaki, the blue-haired boy, leaned against a wall, observing Mirio with interest, while Nijire stood beside him, also watching the blonde with a smile. Mirio faced the group of 1A students, beaming as he prepared to showcase his abilities. He truly resembled a mini All Might. Kage noticed movement out of the corner of his eye and turned to see a slender figure lurking just around the corner of the building, watching Mirio. It was unmistakably All Might, though in his slimmer form, it was harder to recognize him. Kage wondered why he was observing the third-year student. As the demonstration began, Kage redirected his attention to the class. In mere seconds, all the students were sprawled on the ground, groaning. 𝐼𝐻𝐻 stood among them, grinning widely. Kage was taken aback by the unexpected sight. 𝐼𝐻𝐻 turned his gaze toward Kage, still smiling brightly, and asked if it was his turn now. Kage quickly shook his head, explaining that he wasn't a student. However, Aizawa's voice cut in, insisting that it was indeed Kage's turn. The teacher shot Kage a glare that clearly communicated his displeasure about Kage skipping class for weeks. With a sigh, Kage turned to face 𝐼𝐻𝐻, only to find that the third year had already vanished. Kage spun around, scanning the ground for 𝐼𝐻𝐻's reappearance. Suddenly he spotted him. The Vigilante pulled one of his 𝐒𝐮𝐬 sticks from its sheath and brought it down to connect with 𝐼𝐻𝐻's head as he sprang up from the ground behind Kage. Kage refrained from using his electric abilities, not wanting to harm the third year. 𝐼𝐻𝐻 stumbled back, rubbing his head but still smiling. 𝐼𝐻𝐻 remarked on the encounter, asking if Kage had predicted where he would emerge. Kage shrugged, putting away his 𝐒𝐮𝐬 stick and responding nonchalantly. The other students began to rise, still complaining about their minor injuries. Kage stepped back, observing as Aizawa spoke to them for a moment. He found himself lost in thought, contemplating 𝐼𝐻𝐻's quirk. It was a power that seemed nearly impossible for an ordinary person to empower, regardless of practice. Yet 𝐼𝐻𝐻 appeared completely at ease with his abilities, and there was something peculiar about his fighting style that reminded Kage of All Might. He couldn't quite pinpoint why, but it was undeniable. There was a connection between the hero and this third-year student, and Kage was determined to uncover the truth. Suk gazed anxiously at the 1A dorms, concern etched on his face as he questioned whether it was acceptable for them to stay. Jack stood beside him, looking rather bored, while 𝗟𝗓 was likely off somewhere, unintentionally intimidating other students while trying to make friends. At first glance, 𝗟𝗓 resembled a barbarian, as if he had stepped out of a Dungeons and Dragons game, but in reality, he was quite gentle. That didn't mean he was particularly bright, but his good nature often won people over. Before Suk could voice any objections to Izuku, several students burst out of the dorm building. Uraraka led the group, with Tsu and Ida right behind her. Kirishima, Mina, and Kaminari followed, dragging 𝐒𝐵𝐾𝐽 along. They approached the three standing outside, all wearing cheerful expressions, except for 𝐒𝐵𝐾𝐽, of course. Izuku confirmed that these were indeed his friends, Jack and Suk, and mentioned 𝗟𝗓, the big, intimidating-looking man with brown hair wandering around campus, assuring them he was friendly. Kirishima introduced himself and the others, extending a hand for Suk to shake. After a moment of hesitation, Suk accepted the handshake. Uraraka suggested they throw a party, her bright smile lighting up the atmosphere. Izuku looked at her, puzzled, asking what the occasion was. She frowned slightly, explaining that it was to celebrate his return and to welcome his friends. Izuku shook his head, but Jack grinned mischievously at the idea. Izuku sat on a bar stool at the establishment where Jack worked, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Jack had convinced his manager to close the restaurant early, allowing the students of Class 1A to take over. The restaurant, usually frequented by heroes, welcomed a few regulars who chose to stay, gradually filling the space. One of the most amusing moments occurred when Miruko entered. Upon spotting 𝗟𝗓, she made a beeline for him. As she approached, 𝗟𝗓's normally vibrant green flames flickered to a soft pink. Without warning, Miruko delivered a punch to his face, and the two erupted into a heated exchange, pointing fingers and shouting in frustration. The chaos only subsided when Hawks and Jack stepped in to intervene. Most of the Class 1A students had arrived, along with a few uninvited guests from Class 1B. Izuku found himself in a booth, sipping coffee while listening to Ochako and Ida engage in a spirited debate about school matters. Tsu nudged Izuku's shoulder, drawing his attention. She smiled warmly, cradling her cup of tea. They expressed how much they had missed him, and their enthusiasm was contagious. Just then, someone slid into the seat across from Izuku. He looked up to meet Kaken's dark red gaze, and to his surprise, Kaken smiled back. The others at the table greeted him with varying levels of enthusiasm. Kaken revealed that he wanted to talk to Izuku, prompting Izuku to wonder what it was about. Kaken hesitated before asking if Izuku could share what had happened after a particular incident, expressing a need to understand Izuku's experiences. Izuku fidgeted for a moment but eventually nodded, acknowledging that it was a long story. Just then, Kirishima's voice broke through the serious atmosphere, and Izuku looked up to see him, along with Mina and Kaminari, joining the table. Mina noticed the somber mood and expressed concern for Izuku. Ochako mentioned that Izuku was going to share about his life, and he confirmed that it was all right for everyone to stay. It wasn't as if his past was a secret. Taking a deep breath, Izuku prepared himself to recount his story, knowing it would be a challenging task. He began to share his experiences right after the incident, recalling the moment that had changed everything for him. Young Izuku had felt lost and alone, tears brimming in his eyes as he wiped them away, cursing himself for feeling weak. He had always believed that he wasn't meant to be a hero, especially being quirkless. With nowhere to go, he hesitated, not wanting to face the pity from adults or the disdain from Kaken. Before he could decide his next move, a voice called out from a nearby alley, questioning his belief in a so-called hero. Turning slowly, Izuku saw a figure cloaked in shadows, its form swirling like smoke. The figure's bright yellow orbs glowed where eyes should have been. Despite knowing better than to engage with strangers, Izuku felt compelled to listen. The shadowy figure offered a chance to change his quirkless status, and though Izuku knew he should be cautious, desperation clouded his judgment. He agreed, hoping for a better future. 2 days later, Izuku realized he had made a mistake. What he had thought would be a transformative experience turned out to be a grim reality. The Shadow Man, 𝐼𝐻𝐬, had led him to a shabby bar filled with a disorganized group of villains. Initially, he felt welcomed, but that sense of belonging quickly faded. Testing began, and each day, Izuku found himself subjected to medical procedures that left him in pain, with new scars appearing on his body. He was forced to fight creatures known as Nomu, and for the first year, he faced defeat more often than not. The battles left him with chaotic scars, a stark contrast to the neat ones from the tests. At night, he was confined to a room without comfort, left alone until morning when someone would finally bring him food. The initial excitement of being among the villains soon wore off, leaving Izuku feeling more isolated than ever. When Izuku entered a room, he often felt invisible, with others either ignoring him or whispering about his perceived failures. The only person who showed him kindness was 𝐿. The brown-haired man would visit him at night or bring him snacks after particularly challenging testing days. He never raised his voice at Izuku or caused him any harm. Along with Jack and 𝗏𝗏, 𝐿 made life with the League of Villains more bearable. However, one day of testing took a turn for the worse. Izuku woke up in the testing chair, his wrists and ankles still bound to the uncomfortable surface. Something felt off. Usually, someone would be nearby, monitoring him. But today, he was completely alone. That was when he heard the voices. It sounded like Shigaraki and 𝐼𝐻𝐬 arguing. One voice expressed concern about their progress, suggesting they needed more time, while the other insisted they had to deliver a fully functioning human Nomu soon, as all for one would be arriving in 2 days. The implications struck Izuku hard. The League intended to turn him into a Nomu, one of the very monsters he had fought against for so long. In that moment, a new determination surged within him. He would no longer passively accept what was happening to him. That night, Jack and 𝗏𝗏 joined 𝐿 for a visit. Jack's expression was serious, and a flicker of fear shone in his eyes. 𝐿's worry was evident on his face, which made Izuku's heart race a little faster. He wondered what was wrong. 𝐿 hesitated, glancing down the hall before motioning for Izuku to follow him. Confused, Izuku stood and followed the 3 men out of the room. When they reached the back door, Izuku froze, questioning their intentions. Jack, known for his sensible nature, reassured him that they were just trying to help him stay safe. Izuku expressed concern about the trouble they could face if others found out, but Jack insisted they wouldn't be discovered. He leaned down, placing a hand on Izuku's shoulder, urging him to promise that he would get as far away as possible. Jack reminded him of his dream to be a hero, and Izuku nodded, feeling a mix of fear and resolve. Jack encouraged him to go, believing in his ability to escape. Without hesitation, Izuku ran. Later, he shared his story with friends around a table. He recounted how he had met his manager, Yui, who offered him a place to stay above her cafe, and how he began working as a waiter. During one of his early patrols, he encountered Mei from the support course, who assisted him with his gear. He felt a sense of pride, knowing that his journey was just beginning. Silence enveloped the group as they processed his words. Izuku fidgeted, worried he had revealed too much and that they might judge him. Kirishima broke the silence with a gentle smile, expressing relief that Izuku was safe now. Despite the somber atmosphere, Izuku found himself smiling back, feeling a sense of camaraderie. A week after the gathering at Jack's bar, Kage was out on afternoon patrol. This was a new routine for him, as he typically patrolled at night due to his responsibilities at UA during the day. With the 1A students busy with internships, Kage found himself with extra free time, which allowed him to spend more time with Mei, Suk, Jack, and Thresh. The trio had secured an apartment near Yui's cafe, and Kage enjoyed their company without the fear of being seen. Since leaving the league, Suk appeared happier and more vibrant, which brought Kage joy. As Kage leaped to the next building, he remained vigilant. Though most heroes were aware of his UA job and he no longer had to worry about being spotted, old habits lingered. He instinctively scanned his surroundings, counting exits and planning escape routes, reminding himself that he was no longer in constant danger. During patrols, Kage could revert to his old ways from his early vigilante days, and he sometimes missed that freedom. Back then, he could throw himself into peril without concern for anyone else. But now, he had friends who cared for him, and he needed to stay alive for their sake. His keen eyes soon spotted a familiar spike of blonde hair. 𝐾𝐿 was walking down a busy street, engaged in conversation with Mirio. Kage noted that 𝐾𝐿 had interned with 𝐼𝐼, a choice that puzzled him. He hopped down from the building, landing lightly next to 𝐾𝐿, who nearly jumped in surprise. Kage wore a mischievous grin. He approached 𝐾𝐿, inquiring about his internship. 𝐾𝐿 sighed, catching up to Mirio, who looked surprised to see the short boy in dark green. Mirio hesitated before asking if 𝐾𝐿 knew Kage. 𝐾𝐿 confirmed their acquaintance, reminding Mirio that they had met during class. Recognition lit up Mirio's face, and his smile became genuine. He recalled Kage as the one who had managed to fight him, unlike 𝐾𝐿, whom he playfully poked. 𝐾𝐿 smacked Mirio's hand away, prompting laughter from Kage. Kage then expressed his boredom and asked if he could join them. Mirio beamed, inviting Kage to accompany them on their patrol, which was meant to keep an eye out for trouble. Kage frowned, sensing that Mirio had hesitated to reveal something more, but the tall blonde had already turned away, quickening his pace. 𝐾𝐿 followed, and Kage jogged to keep up with them. As they wandered, they encountered no trouble and hardly anyone at all. Just as Kage was about to return to his own patrol, he felt something bump against his leg. Looking down, he saw a little girl sitting on the ground, rubbing her head. Her white hair and dark red eyes reminded him of 𝐾𝐿. 𝐾𝐿 appeared beside Kage, concern etched on his face as he frowned down at the girl. Kage ignored him and knelt to meet the girl's gaze, reaching out to take her hand. She flinched at first but then clung to his arm. Kage spoke softly, asking if she was okay and apologizing for the collision. The girl seemed not to hear him, burying her face in his chest and whispering for help. Kage's heart raced at her plea. Before he could respond, a figure emerged from the alley where the girl had come from. Kage looked up to meet the eyes of 𝐼𝐼, who regarded him with recognition and disdain. The villain reached out, grabbing the girl's arm. "Come on, 𝐼𝐼. It's time to go home," he said. 𝐼𝐼, however, refused to let go of Kage. Just then, Mirio appeared behind Kage, greeting 𝐼𝐼 with a warm smile. Mirio asked if 𝐼𝐼 was 𝐼𝐼's daughter. 𝐼𝐼 nodded, pulling on 𝐼𝐼 until she finally released Kage and stumbled back to stand next to him. 𝐼𝐼 insisted they should leave, and with one last terrified glance at Kage, 𝐼𝐼 followed him into the shadows. Kage watched them disappear before turning to Mirio, whose smile had faded. Kage expressed frustration, questioning why Mirio allowed 𝐼𝐼 to escape and whether he understood the danger the villain posed. He felt a familiar tension in his stomach, recalling his previous encounter with 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐽. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on Kage's shoulder. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 acknowledged knowing who 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐽 was and explained that they had been searching for him. He wanted to rescue 𝗟𝐼 but felt they needed reinforcements to confront 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐽 effectively. Kage understood the truth in 𝐼𝐻𝐬's words, but it still stung. He declared that he wanted to be informed when the time was right to act, insisting he would join the fight. Determination surged within him as he leaped to the top of a building, his grappling hook propelling him forward. He was resolute in his mission to rescue 𝗟𝐼 and confront 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐽, vowing to knock that villain's mask off his face. Kage hadn't intended to spy on All Might and 𝐼𝐻𝐬, he just happened to be nearby. It wasn't his fault that he overheard their conversation. He was going about his usual routine, checking on security around the UA campus after classes had ended. With some time to spare before his patrol, he found himself perched high in a tree, keeping an eye on the front gate. As he swung his legs from his branch, he caught snippets of their discussion. All Might expressed concern about a mission, sounding unusually apprehensive. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 insisted that he needed to take action for 𝗟𝐼, emphasizing that she needed a hero. Kage was intrigued, realizing he had never heard All Might sound fearful before. He recalled a moment when he thought he had seen All Might observing 𝐼𝐻𝐬. The connection between them was becoming clearer. All Might cautioned 𝐼𝐻𝐬 against risking too much until he fully 𝗟𝗱 one for all. Kage nearly lost his balance in the tree at the mention of one for all. He had spent considerable time around the league and had heard discussions about it before. During those phone calls, there was always at least one mention of one for all. However, Kage had never quite connected the dots. One for all was the power that All for One desired, and All Might was the hero that All for One aimed to defeat. Now, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 possessed that power, which meant he was in danger. Kage resolved then and there that even if he wasn't invited on the mission to save 𝗟𝐼, he would go. He needed to ensure 𝐼𝐻𝐬's safety. Despite his feelings toward All Might, Kage couldn't bear the thought of losing someone as bright as 𝐼𝐻𝐬. Fortunately, Kage wouldn't have to worry about being left behind. The next day, Aizawa approached him after class, his expression serious, which immediately put Kage on edge. Aizawa took a moment before speaking, his voice sounding hollow as he addressed Kage. He mentioned that Bakugo had informed him about Kage being present during the encounter with the little girl. Kage froze, surprised that Bakugo had shared that information. Did this mean Aizawa had figured out his intentions? Was he going to try to prevent him from joining the mission? Aizawa confirmed that Kage had a previous encounter with 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐽, to which Kage nodded, forcing himself to focus. Aizawa then expressed his longing for Kage to join them on the mission to save the girl. This unexpected invitation surprised Kage. He had anticipated Aizawa would try to stop him. Before Kage could respond, Aizawa raised a hand, stating that he had one condition. Kage needed to bring his 3 friends along. Confused, Kage asked why. Aizawa explained that at least one of them seemed sensible enough to prevent Kage from making reckless decisions, suggesting they would act as his bodyguards. Kage almost laughed at that. While Jack might be able to rein him in, Sook and Thresh would likely join him in any impulsive decisions. Nevertheless, Kage nodded in agreement, as he had already planned to ask his friends to accompany him. Aizawa nodded back and left Kage to his thoughts. One thing was certain, Kage needed to visit a certain friend's house. The next day, Izuku sighed as he faced Mei, who questioned if he had permission to join the mission. He confirmed that Aizawa had given him the go-ahead. Mei smiled, teasing that she would help him regardless of permission, but she wanted to know what kind of trouble to expect. Izuku smiled back, hugging a pillow to his chest. He had visited Mei's house many times but had never ventured beyond her room. Sitting on her bedroom floor, he wondered what the rest of her house looked like. Was it as chaotic as her room, or did her parents keep everything tidy? It was difficult for Izuku to imagine what a typical family life was like. Did they gather around a table for meals? Did they share laughter and stories? He would never know, but he was content with his own life. Suddenly, Mei threw something at him, jolting him from his thoughts. He looked down to find a mask in his lap, a smile spreading across his face as he examined it. Mei explained that she had made modifications since he had broken his old one. The mask was perfect, equipped with a voice modulator, an earpiece, and attached goggles. Izuku praised Mei for her ingenuity, and she accepted the compliment with a sly smile, reminding him that he needed to prepare for the big day ahead, tomorrow, when he would save Eri. Mei hugged Kage tightly, and he sighed, returning the embrace. He anticipated her words before she pulled away, frowning as she warned him not to die and to avoid any reckless behavior. Kage managed a reassuring smile, though he didn't fully believe it. He joked about being serious, attempting a stern expression that made Mei laugh. She then turned to the three friends standing behind Kage, giving them a meaningful look that conveyed a silent message: keep him safe or face the consequences. Jack nodded in understanding, while Sook and 𝗏𝗏 appeared confused. Kage sighed, hugging Mei tightly one last time before turning to leave with his friends, waving back at her as they disappeared around the corner. Kage felt confident that they would all make it through this mission, including Eri. Todoroki appeared surprised, clearly not anticipating the question. It was unusual for a stranger to approach and inquire about why someone was holding back. He responded with a chill in his voice, one that could freeze water without his ice quirk. Yet, Izuku continued speaking. He expressed his apologies for what might seem rude but pointed out that it was somewhat selfish of Todoroki to hold back. With such an impressive quirk, only using his ice side limited his potential. If he had Todoroki's abilities, he would embrace both sides, regardless of the painful memories tied to them. Todoroki frowned at Izuku, but the green-haired boy remained. After a long moment of silence between them, Todoroki spoke softly, each word sharp and precise. He told Izuku that he knew nothing about him and questioned what gave him the right to dictate how he should use his power. Izuku sighed, having anticipated this reaction. He asserted that he actually knew a lot about Todoroki, including the painful events surrounding his mother and the harshness of his father. He understood that Todoroki believed using only his mother's quirk was a way to rebel against his father, but in reality, it was preventing him from reaching his full potential. If he could set aside his troubled relationship with his father, he could become the strongest hero in the world. It was his power, not his father's. Todoroki seemed taken aback, as if struck by a sudden realization. He turned and walked away, offering a brief thank you. Izuku nodded, feeling he had done what he could. Now, he would have to wait and see if his words had any impact. 30 minutes later, Izuku found himself in front of the rest of Class 1A, minus Bakugo, smiling and waving shyly at them. After introductions, everyone split into small groups for shopping. Izuku ended up with Yura and Tsu, which felt a bit awkward as they held hands and exchanged affectionate glances. Eventually, he managed to slip away, walking slowly towards the exit. Being in a crowded public place felt strange. Izuku usually avoided such environments, as they attracted attention from heroes and villains alike, and he disliked being present during those conflicts. He often felt powerless, unable to assist without revealing his own identity. Additionally, he found the attention civilians gave to All Might somewhat bothersome. Suddenly, he felt an arm drape over his shoulder. A familiar voice, low and raspy, sent an involuntary shiver down his spine. He dared not look up at Shigaraki's scarred face as a cold hand gripped his throat. He suggested that it was time for a little talk. In another scene, 𝗏𝗏 assured Kage that if anything went wrong, the three of them would be there to keep him safe. His pat on the back felt more like a smack, but the big man smiled warmly down at Kage. It was surprising to see such kindness from someone who looked like a punk, but Kage had grown accustomed to it. He found it amusing that he had once been intimidated by 𝗏𝗏, a man who knitted as a hobby. Kage expressed concern for his friends, noting that it was their first time out in the field in 5 years. Jack nodded, while Sook attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. 𝗏𝗏 reassured Kage that they would be fine, having faced more dangerous situations before and come out all right. Kage felt that, all right, was a low bar, but he nodded, not wanting to argue. He encouraged Sook, patting him on the shoulder, and then excused himself, stating he had somewhere to go. In a reflective moment, Izuku visited the graveyard where his mother, 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐵 Midoriya, was buried. The grass had long withered, but he sat there, gazing at the fresh bouquet of flowers on her headstone. He hadn't been able to visit her grave before, but something compelled him to come now. Perhaps it was the feeling that he might face danger today, or a sense of foreboding that something might go wrong. He shook off those thoughts and focused on the inscription on his mother's grave, which simply read, "In loving memory of 𝐼𝐮𝐬 𝐃𝐞𝐭𝐚𝐢𝐥𝐬." There were no dates, no additional words. Izuku suspected that the heroes had tried to obscure 𝗟𝗏𝐼𝐻's failures, ensuring that nothing about 𝐼𝐮𝐬's grave would attract attention. The starkness of the headstone drew his focus, making him feel that a part of his mother was missing. He wondered if her body was truly buried there or if it was merely a ceremonial marker. Izuku felt like the worst son. He had been too absorbed in his own grief to consider what his mother had experienced after the accident. What had gone through her mind in her final moments? Had she thought of him, her only son, her mistake? Had she seen him standing in the doorway, frozen as the ceiling collapsed? Unable to remain any longer, he murmured a few final words and quickly left the small graveyard. He was determined that he would never let someone down like that again. 𝗏𝗟𝐬𝐼𝐻's voice pulled Kage from his thoughts, reminding him that they were about to meet the internship students. He had been lost in memories of his mother, and he knew he needed to focus on the mission ahead. The Vigilante stood up and followed 𝗟𝗟𝐬𝐻 out of the classroom. The class had ended early, allowing them to prepare, while the other classes continued. As Kage walked down the hall, he noticed a few curious glances, but the students at the school had grown accustomed to his presence. Kage quickened his pace to match 𝗟𝗟𝐻's, knowing they were headed to meet 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗟𝗘, Jack, and 𝗏𝗏𝗏 at the school gates. Together, the 5 of them would take the train to the location they had coordinated with the other heroes. This location was just a short distance from the 𝗟𝗏𝗧𝗟𝗘 hideout, cleverly concealed beneath a small business. 𝗟𝗟𝐻 turned to Kage, expressing concern by asking if he was all right. This was unusual for him, but perhaps worry brought out different sides in people. Kage assured him that he was fine and eager to complete the mission. 𝗟𝗟𝐻 nodded in response, and they both fell into a contemplative silence, each aware that their challenges were far from over. As they reached their destination, Ochako hurried over to Kage, accompanied by Tsu and Kirishima. Out of the corner of his eye, Kage noticed the 3 third years, 𝗟𝗏𝗏, Tamaki and 𝗏𝗏𝗏, whispering among themselves, their expressions filled with concern. Kage chose to disregard them. It wasn't his concern. 𝗏𝐵𝐻𝐽 approached, and Kage smiled beneath his mask. The hero costume 𝗏𝐵𝐻𝐽 wore was a bit extravagant for Kage's taste, but it suited the blonde well. 𝗏𝐵𝐻𝐽 scoffed, and Kirishima grinned, appearing completely at ease. Kage figured that nervousness didn't fit Kirishima's personality. In fact, all the students seemed upbeat, confident that the task ahead would be straightforward. 𝗟𝗟𝐻's voice cut through the chatter, commanding attention. He organized everyone into groups, placing Kage, Kirishima, and 𝗏𝐵𝐻𝐽 in the inner group alongside Tamaki, 𝗟𝗏𝗏, 𝗏𝗏𝗏, Jack, and 𝗏𝗏𝗏. Ochako and Tsu joined 𝗏𝗏𝗏 in the outer group. Before they parted ways, Ochako embraced each of them, her smile radiant. With a cheerful farewell, she expressed her hope to see them on the other side. Kage sighed as he glanced back at Rocklock, who was trailing behind him, eyeing 𝗏𝗏𝗏, Jack, and 𝗏𝗏𝗏 with suspicion. "They're here to ensure that one doesn't act recklessly," 𝗟𝗟𝐻 stated, pointing at Kage. 𝗏𝐵𝐻𝐽 chuckled at this. Like anyone could stop this guy if he decided to do something reckless. "Trust me, it's impossible." Kage playfully smacked 𝗏𝐻𝐽 on the shoulder, eliciting a snort from him. Rocklock appeared puzzled but opted not to question it, likely a wise choice. 𝗟𝗟𝐻 then asked Kage about 𝗟𝗏𝗏's quirk, causing Kage to tense up as painful memories surged back. He recalled the helplessness he felt, knowing his fate was in 𝗟𝗏𝗏's hands. A tap on his shoulder startled him, and instinctively, he swung his arm. 𝗟𝗟𝐻 caught it with his capture weapon, concern evident in his gaze. "Are you all right?" 𝗟𝗟𝐻 inquired. Kage retracted his hand, shaking his head to dispel the memories. "I'm fine. What do you want to know?" 𝗟𝗟𝐻 still looked worried but chose not to press. Further, turning to continue walking. "To start, what does it do exactly?" Kage felt a shiver run through him. He noticed 𝗏𝐻𝐽 giving him a concerned look, but he brushed it aside. "It's a type of manipulative quirk. When he used it on me, it felt like my insides were being torn apart and reshaped." He instinctively pressed his hand against his stomach, recalling the unsettling sensation. That moment had marked the first time he had felt utterly powerless. Well, the first time since his mother. Anyway, as long as he can't touch you, he can't reshape you, Kage stated, attempting to sound casual. Judging by the concerned glances from the heroes around him, he wasn't convincing. Aizawa nodded, mentally cataloging the information, likely adding it to his extensive knowledge base. Suddenly, the walls of the hall began to shake. Kage glanced at Bakugo, who appeared confused. An earthquake. Without warning, a stone arm burst through the wall, crashing into Fat Gum and Kirishima. They vanished into a hole that quickly sealed itself. We need to stop the shaking, Aizawa shouted over the noise of creaking walls. Just as a significant tremor seemed imminent, everything abruptly froze, remaining in a distorted state. Kage turned to Rocklock, who pressed his hand against the wall, sweat trickling down his face. We need to keep moving, Rocklock urged. They continued onward, Rocklock freezing walls as they progressed deeper into the hall. Suddenly, they entered a large room that felt out of place in an underground base. This doesn't feel right, Kage murmured. We need to. Walls erupted from the ground, separating the group. Kage spun around, spotting Bakugo nearby. Great, it was just the two of them. Kaken's quirk wouldn't be effective against solid stone. Then, a hole opened in the wall, revealing a girl with a sharp grin. Hey Zuzu. Long time, no see. Kage's heart sank as he recognized Toga. He shot a warning look at Bakugo, urging him to stay back. Toga advanced slowly, still grinning. That was so rude of you, stealing our friend like that. Someone should really teach you a lesson about manners. In an instant, she lunged forward, a knife glinting in her hand. Kage dodged to the side, but a searing pain erupted in his gut. He stumbled back, staring down at the knife handle protruding from his body. He realized Toga had been wielding two knives. Out of the corner of his eye, Kage noticed Bakugo engaging Toga, shouting something, but the sounds around him faded. His ears felt muffled, and his vision began to blur. Slumping against the newly formed wall, Kage's mind swirled. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he remembered he was there for a purpose. But what was it? He was there to rescue someone. Who was it again? The girl, perhaps? A girl with red eyes appeared before Kage as he struggled to focus through his fading vision. She seemed to be shouting something, but he couldn't make out the words. Confusion clouded his mind, and he felt himself slipping away, managing only one coherent thought. He needed to save that girl, whoever she was. Kage slowly opened his eyes, disoriented by the noise surrounding him. He couldn't remember where he was. As his vision cleared, he recognized the worried face hovering above him. It was Kaken. He sat up gingerly, wincing at the pain in his side, prompting Bakugo to exhale in relief. They thought he had lost consciousness for good. Kage pressed a hand to his abdomen, surprised that the pain had lessened. Bakugo, noticing his confusion, shrugged and held up an empty bottle. I found this in your pocket. I thought it might help, he explained. Kage stared at him, astonished. He couldn't believe Bakugo had given him something without knowing its effects. Bakugo shrugged again, and Kage sighed, taking in his surroundings. The walls had vanished, and Aizawa stood next to the crumpled form of an unfamiliar individual, likely the cause of the chaos, judging by the glares exchanged between Aizawa and 𝐼𝐼. With some effort, Kage rose to his feet. The liquid Bakugo had given him was likely Recovery Girl's healing medicine, which explained his improved condition. As he stood, three figures rushed over, each displaying varying degrees of concern. Sook was breathing heavily, Thresh looked extremely worried, and Jack appeared indifferent, as usual. Jack approached Kage and flicked his forehead, causing Kage to blink in confusion. Jack frowned and remarked that Kage's actions had been reckless. Kage couldn't believe it. Getting stabbed was considered foolish. Jack scoffed and turned away, leaving Sook to offer an apologetic glance. Sorry about him. He really does care, Sook said. Kage acknowledged this with a sigh. He understood. Thresh, now more cheerful, added that Jack seemed particularly stressed about Kage's condition, aside from Bakugo. At the mention of the blonde kid, Bakugo looked up, and 𝗏𝗏 waved at him with a bright smile. Bakugo returned the gesture, albeit confused. Mirio's voice broke through the moment, expressing concern about their slow progress toward 𝗟𝐼. Kage turned to see the usually cheerful third year wearing a frown. Night Eye placed a reassuring hand on Mirio's shoulder, but Mirio shrugged it off, insisting he could reach 𝗟𝐼 faster on his own. Kage understood the implication. Mirio's quirk allowed him to phase through matter, making him the fastest option. However, it seemed risky for him to go alone. Jack then interjected, stating he could also pass through walls, which silenced most of the arguing heroes. Mirio smiled at Jack, and they quickly agreed to team up. With that, 𝐒𝐮𝐬 vanished through a wall, followed closely by Jack, who transformed into smoke before slipping through the stone. Night Eye urged the remaining heroes to catch up quickly, knowing that if Mirio and Jack encountered 𝗟𝗏 alone, they would be in serious trouble. After running through the halls for about 10 minutes, the remaining group of heroes entered a larger room. Tamaki had separated from them to confront a few minor villains, while Rocklock stayed behind to ensure their escape route remained clear. Now it was just Bakugo, Night Eye, Aizawa, Sook, 𝗏𝗏, and 𝐾𝐿. The expansive room was filled with sharp rock formations and signs of a recent struggle. Kage quickly scanned the area, searching for any sign of life. It was completely empty. Kage dropped the 2 halves of the cookie to the ground, watching as it disintegrated. 𝗟𝐼 remained seated, quietly sobbing, surrounded by dust that had once been Kage's friend. Suddenly, Kage felt the ground rumble beneath him. He attempted to rise to his feet, preparing to defend himself. He couldn't remain an easy target. Before he could move, a rock spire shot up from the ground in front of him, aimed directly at his chest. This was it. He was about to meet his end. A figure leaped in front of him, taking the spear directly to the heart. Kage gasped, stepping back as Mirio fell to the ground, coughing. Not him too. Kage dropped to his knees beside the third year, desperate to help. But the moment he saw the wound in Mirio's chest, he understood there was nothing he could do. The gaping hole left by the spire spilled BLD over the blonde's hero costume. Yet somehow, Mirio remained smiling, BLD trickling from his mouth and pooling on the ground beneath him. Not again. Not someone else. Why couldn't it have been him? Mirio squeezed Kage's hand, drawing the Vigilante's attention. You know about One for All, right? Mirio's voice was slurred, his eyes slowly losing focus. Kage nodded, gently shaking the third year's shoulder to keep him awake. Yes, I know. Mirio's smile widened. I saw you that day, up in the tree. I was worried you might tell someone, but I shouldn't have been. You'll make a great hero, you know. Before Kage could react, Mirio pressed his bloodied hand against a small cut on Kage's arm. The Vigilante's eyes widened as their BLD mingled, Mirio's essence flowing into him. Then the power surged in. Kage felt it even before the green lightning flickered over his body. But what? Why would Mirio bestow this power upon him? He didn't deserve it. He had failed to save 2 of his closest friends and had been powerless to stop his own mother's fate. How could he ever become a hero? Mirio must have seen the turmoil in Kage's eyes, for his bright smile turned comforting, his gaze becoming increasingly unfocused. Don't worry. You can become a great hero. I believe in you. Then he was gone. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 was lost, and Izuku Midoriya now possessed the strongest quirk in history. 𝗟𝐼 was screaming. Kage spun around, taking in the scene before him with wide eyes. 𝗟𝐼 clung tightly to Sook, who was desperately trying to keep her in his arms. 𝗟𝗏 had a firm grip on 𝗟𝐼's wrist, pulling her toward the new hole in the ceiling. But 𝗟𝗏 appeared different. 2 new sets of arms protruded from his sides, and large wings flapped at his back, resembling skin. Kage fought the urge to recoil, turning to assess the other heroes. Aizawa lay on the ground, struggling to rise. Bakugo fought against the stone cage surrounding him. Night Eye had it worst. He stood upright, but not by choice, as a spear of stone pierced his stomach. Kage already knew he was powerless to help. He turned and ran toward 𝗟𝗏. The villain had managed to pull 𝗟𝐼 from Sook's arms and was now ascending into the sky. Kage took a running leap, feeling his newfound power surge through him, propelling him upward. 𝐼𝐻𝐬! Kage reached out his hand, desperately trying to grasp her. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 looked up, tears streaming down her face as she watched the Vigilante soar toward her. Why wasn't she trying to escape? Something clicked for Kage. Perhaps she felt trapped. He took a chance, shouting as loudly as he could. Your quirk isn't evil. Because you aren't evil. Your quirk is perfect. 𝐼𝐻𝐬's eyes widened, her red pupils dilating. 𝗟𝗏𝗸 hissed, struggling to maintain his hold on her as he ascended, but it was futile. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 wriggled free, launching herself at Kage. The Vigilante caught her mid-air, continuing to rise through the hole and into the daylight. Screams erupted as 𝗟𝗏𝗸 emerged, teeth bared and a hiss escaping his lips. Kage saw people running in all directions, trying to escape the rampaging villain. How could he stop him alone? You can become a great hero. I believe in you. Determination filled Kage, and he made his decision. He would confront 𝗟𝗏𝗸 right here, right now. No one else would perish today. Taking a deep breath, he let the power of one for all surge within him. Green lightning flickered over Kage's body. His hair lifted, and though he couldn't see it, he sensed his eyes glowing. That was good. He needed to control the power. Kage glanced up at 𝗟𝗏𝗸, who was circling above. After quickly securing 𝗟𝐻𝐬 to his back with spare fabric, he drew in more power. Kage propelled himself off the ground, rocketing into the sky toward the massive figure of 𝗟𝗏𝗸. As he got close enough, the Vigilante raised his hand, striking the villain further into the sky. Kage felt the bones in his arm and hand shatter. He cried out, pulling his arm back. That wasn't good. Suddenly, a wave of warmth enveloped him. Kage watched in astonishment as his arm seemed to heal, the bones fitting back together perfectly. Could this be the influence of one for all? It seemed unlikely. As Kage soared through the air toward the distant figure of 𝗟𝗏𝗸, he cast a glance back at 𝗟𝐻𝐬. She had her eyes tightly shut, her horn radiating a brilliant glow. In fact, her entire being shimmered with energy. This was the essence of her quirk, a truly remarkable ability. Kage smiled, redirecting his focus to 𝗟𝗏𝗸. This confrontation was coming to a close. 𝗟𝗏𝗻 was engaged in a fierce battle with 𝗟𝗏𝗸, struggling to gain the upper hand. Meanwhile, Jack held a distressed 𝗟𝐻𝐬 in his arms, attempting to soothe her as skeletons emerged from the ground around them. The situation was dire. 𝗟𝗏𝗻 bore multiple deep wounds, yet he remained on his feet. Jack had a cut on his head, blood trickling down his face. 𝗟𝗏𝗧 shouted, and more skeletons erupted from the earth, charging at 𝗟𝗏𝗸. The villain turned, noticing the new arrivals with a scowl. He drew a weapon from his belt and aimed it at 𝗟𝐻𝐬, a quirk erasing gun that Kage recognized. Before Kage could react, someone dashed past him, leaping in front of Jack and 𝗟𝐬. The dart struck the man in the chest, causing him to stagger and fall to the ground. Instantly, the skeletons around the room began to dissolve, turning into piles of ash. 𝗟𝗏𝗧 rushed forward, but the damage had already been done. Slowly, 𝗏𝗏𝗧 removed the dart from his chest, the quirk-erasing dart intended for 𝗟𝐬𝐬. Kage felt a wave of dread wash over him. He hurried to 𝗏𝗏𝗧, gripping his shoulders tightly. The other heroes were locked in combat with 𝗟𝗏𝗸, but to Kage, it all faded into the background. He shook 𝗏𝗏𝗧, desperate for him to respond. He heard 𝗏𝗏𝗧's voice cut through his panic, calling out to Izuku. Kage turned to see Jack still holding 𝗟𝐬𝐬, but something was amiss. Jack's face had turned nearly white, and the light in his eyes was fading. Kage's heart raced. He searched for 𝗟𝗏𝗧, finding him sitting on the ground, eyes wide as he watched his hands slowly turn to dust. This couldn't be happening. Kage turned back to 𝗏𝗏𝗧, unable to mask the anger in his voice. Why did you do it? I could have taken the hit. Look at them. You've sealed their fates. Izuku, stop, Jack said, his voice firm yet filled with sorrow. 𝗟𝐻𝐬 continued to cry, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Kage watched as Jack's legs began to disintegrate, causing him to sink to his knees, still holding on to 𝗟𝐬𝐬. Izuku, don't blame him. It was our choice too, 𝗟𝗏𝗧 said, his voice tinged with sadness, yet he wore a small smile. You forget that we can communicate in our minds, he added. Kage realized they had indeed been part of this decision. Had they truly chosen to sacrifice themselves rather than let Eri lose her quirk? He shook his head, understanding they had made the choice he would have made in their position. "I'm so sorry," Suk said softly, filled with regret. "I didn't know what else to do." "It was worth it, though," 𝗟𝗓 asserted, his voice unwavering. "As long as we can save someone, it was worth it. I would say see you on the other side, but I'm not sure if summons get to go to heaven." Despite the tears in his eyes, 𝗟𝗓 continued to smile as the last remnants of his form faded away. Kage turned back to Jack, who had gently placed Eri on the ground. The girl clung to his disintegrating sleeve, still crying. Jack looked up, meeting Kage's gaze, and offered a small smile, inclining his head. "It's been an honor, Kage." Then he too vanished, leaving Kage alone with only 2 piles of ash where his friends had stood. A small fortune cookie lay on the ground near Eri. With trembling hands, Kage picked it up and cracked it open. Afterward, Kage would struggle to recall how he had managed it. All he understood was that when his mind cleared, he was plummeting towards the ground, chasing the unconscious form of 𝗟𝗏𝗸. In the back of his mind, he realized his mask was missing, likely lost during the battle. However, in that moment, his only concern was ensuring Eri's safety. At the last moment, just before hitting the ground, he activated his new quirk, softening his landing. He rolled upon impact, cradling Eri in his arms. The little girl remained tightly shut-eyed, her breathing uneven. Did she not know how to turn off her quirk? Kage felt his injuries from the day vanish, only for old, healed wounds to reopen. He collapsed to his knees, his head spinning. A sharp pain erupted in his stomach, identical to the wound he had received from that villain months ago, on the very first night he had encountered Aizawa. How had his life transformed so drastically since that night? Kage could hardly remember a time when Class 1A hadn't filled his days. Had there truly been a time when he had no one to rely on? In his arms, Eri trembled, whimpering. Then her horn diminished, and her quirk ceased. Through a haze, Kage looked up at Aizawa, who was limping towards him. When Aizawa reached him, Kage shakily rose to his feet and placed Eri into the hero's arms. They had succeeded. That was all Kage could manage to convey before his mind blanked, and he collapsed into darkness. The doctor examined Kage's upper body with suspicion, noting the scars on his arms and chest. He remarked that Kage appeared to have no injuries, either visible or otherwise. Yet the scars were peculiar. Aizawa entered the Vigilante's hospital room, calling for Kage. Kage quickly put his shirt back on, nodding at the doctor before following Aizawa out of the room. Aizawa's expression was distant, as if lost in thought. He blinked, returning to the present. They were headed to Night Eye's room, where Night Eye had requested to see Kage. Kage wondered why Night Eye wanted to see him specifically, as he couldn't recall ever having spoken to the grumpy hero. He asked about the others, and Aizawa informed him that Kirishima, Fat Gum, and Tamaki had emerged with minimal injuries. Bakugo had some minor wounds but would recover in a few days. Nijire, Tsu, Uraraka, and Rocklock were all fine. However, Aizawa's voice trailed off, and Kage's heart sank. Had no one else survived? He inquired about Eri, and Aizawa quickly shifted the topic, explaining that Eri was in a comatose state, her quirk malfunctioning, and he had been assisting her as much as possible. They entered a room where All Might stood by Night Eye's bed, his head lowered. Upon seeing Aizawa, All Might briefly looked up before returning his focus to his old sidekick. Kage immediately sensed the gravity of the situation. Night Eye lay in a hospital bed, medical equipment attached to him, and a large rock spear protruding from his midsection, a wound far too severe to heal. Night Eye acknowledged Kage's presence, and Kage stepped closer to All Might. He asked why Night Eye wanted to see him. Night Eye coughed, blood escaping his mouth, and inquired about Mirio. A pit formed in Kage's stomach. Did Night Eye know Mirio was gone? He froze, realizing Night Eye was unaware. Kage hesitated, contemplating whether to lie. He didn't want to burden Night Eye with the truth. Gathering his courage, he decided to fabricate a response. Mirio was doing just fine. Night Eye smiled sadly, expressing gratitude. Then his eyes closed and he flatlined. Kage and the two heroes were hurried out of the room as a team of doctors rushed in. But Kage understood it was too late. Night Eye was already lost. No one else. You promised there would be no one else. You failed. You failed them all. Why should you be allowed to live? Didn't they deserve a chance? What makes you so special? Izuku felt a sense of urgency as he prepared to leave. He had to go. As quickly as possible, Kage rushed through the hospital, finding a back door that led into a side alley. He stumbled out, breathing heavily. Removing his mask, the vigilante retrieved his grappling hook from his belt, aiming it at the rooftop. Just as he was about to retract it, a voice interrupted him. So that was it. He was just going to run away. Izuku turned slowly to see 𝐒𝐿 standing in the doorway of the hospital. His arm and chest were bandaged beneath his t-shirt, and his expression was difficult to read. He pleaded for 𝐒𝐿 to let him leave, overwhelmed by the weight of his failures. But 𝐒𝐿's response was firm, though not as harsh as Izuku had anticipated. He knew that if he allowed Izuku to walk away now, he might never see him again. He had already vowed not to let him go again. The grappling hook slipped from Izuku's grasp, and he crumpled to the ground, breaking down in silent sobs. Tears streamed down his face as he felt the warmth of familiar arms wrap around him, pulling him into a comforting embrace. Izuku blinked in surprise, inhaling the scent of his old friend. Why was 𝐒𝐿 hugging him? In that moment, it didn't matter. Izuku clung to 𝐒𝐿, allowing all the emotions he had bottled up for 4 years to pour out. 𝐒𝐿's voice was filled with pain as he expressed his sorrow for everything he had said and done. Izuku struggled to comprehend the depth of that pain, but he felt the sincerity in 𝐒𝐿's apology. They were both grappling with their past, seeking closure in a moment of vulnerability. Izuku glanced up at Aizawa as the hero entered the room, sensing something was off. What was the issue? Aizawa remained silent, simply holding out a laptop that displayed a YouTube video. Izuku's heart sank. How were they supposed to fix this? Nizu looked at the men before him, noting Tsukachi's worry and Aizawa's frustration. The principal sighed, taking a long sip of his tea. Did they really not see the simplest solution? Tsukachi questioned Nizu, wondering if he had already known about Kage's true identity. Nizu couldn't help but laugh, grinning widely. Of course, he had known for months. It was hard to believe anyone could walk around his school without being discovered. Aizawa sighed, burying his face in his hands. So Nizu had known. Did he want a reward for that, or was he going to help? Nizu replayed the shaky YouTube video that the hobo hero had shown him. It was poorly filmed, but there was a moment where the camera captured Izuku's face without his mask during a fight with 𝐿𝐿. The implications were clear. It would lead many to the right conclusion. Nizu finally had an idea, and Aizawa looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. What was it? Nizu smiled widely, ready to share his plan. Make him a student. As of the next year, Izuku Midoriya would be joining Class 1A. The classroom erupted with excitement at Aizawa's announcement, students buzzing with chatter. Izuku leaned back against the wall, a smile on his face. Aizawa had shared the news with him the day before, and the green-haired boy was more than pleased with the idea, especially now that he had a quirk to match. Yet, a part of him still struggled to comprehend it all. After years of convincing himself that he could never be a hero and that he would never possess a quirk, the impossible had become reality. In just a few short days, his entire world had been transformed. Remembering something, Izuku nodded at Aizawa before turning to leave the room, waving goodbye to his classmates as the door closed behind him. He needed to talk to someone. Hey Suk. The brunette looked up from the picture he had been studying. Since the overhaul incident, Suk had become notably quiet, speaking only to Izuku and 𝐼𝐻𝐬. Speaking of 𝐼𝐻𝐬, she was currently curled up in Suk's lap, engrossed in a picture book. She appeared content, and that sight made Izuku's heart swell. This was how she should have grown up, surrounded by love. Izuku settled down next to Suk on the floor of his room, which was much tidier than the last time he had visited. The night after the incident, Izuku had heard a disturbance from Suk's room and found him in the midst of a chaotic space, trembling and distressed. Unsure of how to help at the time, Izuku had felt relieved when 𝐼𝐻𝐬 was released from the hospital and had attached herself to �സുku. The brunette seemed grateful for her presence, and Izuku sensed that �സുku viewed 𝐼𝐻𝐬 as his last connection to his lost friends. He understood that Jack and 𝗏𝗏 had sacrificed everything to keep 𝐼𝐻𝐬 safe, and they would have been proud to see �സുku continuing that legacy. "Are you eating?" Izuku asked. 𝗏𝗏 nodded, glancing back at the picture in his hands. It was old and worn, but Izuku could still make out the faded image of 3 boys leaning on each other, smiling joyfully. "This was the first time I successfully summoned them at the same time. I can't believe it's been so long." 𝗏𝗏's voice was rough from disuse, and his eyes glistened with unshed tears. He shook his head and managed a small smile. "You should get going. You've got that meeting in a few minutes." Izuku nodded and stood up to leave. "I completed that task you asked for, but I'm still puzzled. Why do you need these gloves?" Izuku smiled at Mei as he slipped on the gloves she had given him. They resembled his vigilante gear but were gray and offered much more support. "You'll see," she replied. Turning to 𝐼𝐻𝐬, who nodded and smiled back, Izuku faced the clearing they were in. He raised his right arm, using his left hand for support. Curling his right hand, he flicked it, channeling 5% of one for all into his fingers at the last moment. The force propelled air past him, sending it crashing through the trees, making them sway as if caught in a storm. A wide grin spread across Izuku's face as he turned to Mei, whose eyes were wide with amazement. "How? You know what? Don't tell me. I'm going to figure it out myself." Mei smiled and hugged Izuku before dashing back toward her class. He waved at her until she was out of sight. "It's always beneficial to be close with a support team member," 𝐼𝐻𝐬 remarked, his voice quieter in his smaller form. Izuku turned to him, feeling his smile fade slightly. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 must have noticed as his own smile faltered. "I wanted to discuss something with you." About that day, Izuku raised his hand to stop the hero. He did not want an apology but made it clear that he was not doing this for 𝐼𝐻𝐬. He was doing it for 𝗟𝐬𝐬. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving the hero to watch him go. The school festival was upon them, and Class 1A had decided to host a concert. Izuku's sole responsibility was to ensure 𝗟𝐬𝐬 had a wonderful time. So far, he felt he had failed, but he hoped to see her smile by the end of the day. Before he knew it, he was taking his seat for the performance, 𝗟𝐬𝐬 cradled in his arms. Excitement bubbled within him as he thought about the students who had worked tirelessly for weeks, all eager for this moment. The lights dimmed and the crowd hushed. The music began, and 𝗟𝗓 stood front and center, her bandmates surrounding her. The rest of the students danced as 𝗟𝗓 started to sing. Suddenly, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 descended from the ceiling, his laser illuminating the large room. Streamers cascaded from above as lights sparkled like diamonds all around. Izuku glanced down at 𝗟𝐬𝐬, who was sitting on his lap, and felt tears welling in his eyes. The girl wore the biggest smile he had ever seen, her face glowing with joy. She jumped up, waving her arms and giggling with delight. Overwhelmed with emotion, Izuku hoisted 𝗟𝐬𝐬 onto his shoulders so she could see better. "Are you seeing this, Jack? 𝗏𝗏. 𝗟𝗏𝐬𝐬. She's smiling." They had truly succeeded.